Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Anchorage Assembly. It's our work session, continuing budget. Harriet, let's start with you and work our way around the table for the record.
Harriet Drummond, Assembly, West Anchorage.
Paul Holman, Assembly, East Anchorage.
Elvie Gray Jackson, Assembly.
Chris Birch, Assembly.
Jennifer Johnson, Assembly.
Dick Trainee, Assembly.
Dan Sullivan, Mayor.
Dennis Wheeler, Municipal Attorney.
Barbara Jones, Anchorage Equal Rights Commission.
Nancy Usera, Employee Relations.
Cheryl Frasca, with
And Ernie Hall is downstairs and working his way back up. It may take him a while. So, where are we starting at today?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to start today with Equal Rights Commissions. You should have packets similar to, with Employee Relations, the PRs.
I know.
That's right. Barbara and I could switch.
They look alike, what can I say? So Nancy Usera is
I'm not
going
going
to
there.
kick off and speak.
What we've been able to do is to absorb most of the staff reductions that would be normal in terms of the escalators during the course of the year, and we're proposing some specific efficiency and administrative savings. And sure, the biggest chunk is reclassing, reallocating, and reducing the cost of administration. This includes reclassing one position downward to a lower level position, reallocating positions that are associated with the management of the 603 self-insurance fund. Right now, the past practice has been to allocate 100% of specific positions. The fact is that it makes much more sense because many people share responsibilities among administration and management of all of the benefit programs to reallocate the dollars that are specific to the 603 fund in that way. So we will achieve some general fund savings that way. And reducing the cost of administration. This is probably the area that will prompt most discussion, and that is that when I'm looking at the administrative costs that were charged to the taxpayers for the employee relations functions, one of those costs is the general administration of the police and fire medical trust. The ordinance that dictates what our financial obligations are says that the municipality shall provide funding for up to one professional administrative generalist for the purposes of doing this. Currently, the cost for that is $118,000 a year. When I'm looking at the costs associated with that, I'm looking at the fact that we're managing much bigger, more complicated benefit programs, and we're able to do it a lot more efficiently because we contract out the claims administration to third-party administrators. So I did some investigating, and when I looked at the $118,000, I started saying, is there a better way of doing this? Is there a more cost-effective way of doing it? So one was to outsource a portion of those functions. I've been given, now it wasn't an RFP, so it was pretty preliminary, but for managing 400 beneficiaries, it would cost about $20,000 a year. Then dedicating a half-time position to the administrative support of the board. That would reduce the cost by about $40,000. I understand that the board needs general administration to put meetings together and minutes and all sorts of things. The second option that I looked at is because the ordinance does say provide funding for up to, I said, well, what if they hired someone directly that works directly for the trust and is not a municipal employee? A recent market survey, Milliman survey, shows that benefit administrators on the open market in Anchorage are paid about $55,000, $57,000. So you add 50% salary or benefits to that, and you're still up to about $75,000, $80,000. Again, I'd be saving about $40,000. The third option, and it's alluded to in the ordinance, and I, quite honestly, I don't have the historical reference of why this wasn't pursued, would be to enter into a management contract with the Police and Fire Retirement Board for also providing support to the medical trust. It's the same beneficiary group. So, so when I looked at those three things, I said, I see three better ways of doing it. All of them would result in administrative savings to the taxpayers because these are costs done by the administration. So $40,000 of that $98,000 savings is that. It is not, it's looking at options here. We have migrated to automation. We're doing online open enrollment, which unfortunately is delayed a few days, but it is going live on Monday, which is going to save a tremendous amount of money in terms of administrative processing. We have automated many of our communication systems, and we are working very, very diligently to not be the paper department, but to be the efficient processing department of personnel actions. And then lastly, I spoke with my staff and we talked about what would be a way that we could get personnel savings from our current staffing levels. And there was general agreement among the staff that a programmed leave program, which essentially would mean that on Friday afternoons during the summer, we would shut down and we would have essentially leave without pay. It would be leave without pay for the balance of the afternoon, that we could achieve some savings from that program. It would be the last option that we have, but everyone's pretty agreeable. If we have to lose a little salary doing it on Friday afternoons in the summer, it wouldn't be such a bad deal. So that's what we have.
Thank you. Questions from assembly members?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Cheryl reminded me that I also have to be accountable for what we're doing in the
Not enough to
department.
just spend
It's
money.
not enough to
Before we
just
go to
spend
Paul,
money.
just for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Flynn and our budget chairman, Mr. Starr.
And then, Mr. Chairman, if I could, there are still some
Mayor.
open seats. I see ladies standing. These two chairs can be moved over. They're seating.
Come get the chairs, please, because they're just occupying space.
So, yes, employee relations does have a mission, and it is essentially to attract and retain, to develop and maintain programs that attract, retain, and develop qualified employees to perform public services. When we looked at our goals, they may not look ambitious, but when you think about everything that it takes to attract and retain and develop employees, it falls under those big goals. So our second goal, in addition to maintaining those programs, was to centralize administrative functions. I was rather surprised when I was introduced to the department last year. Again, very inefficient administration, very paper heavy, very procedurally oriented as opposed to outcome oriented. And we've been able to achieve significant efficiencies by centralizing all of the functions within a division, the administration division that is in my office. And it's been very successful. That will continue next year, and that goal will probably change because it will have been accomplished. In terms of accountability, what we looked at is in terms of how are we doing in labor relations, how are we doing in working with our workforce and resolving problems. One of our measures was to monitor the material actions requiring a correction as a result of audits or arbitrations. The goal is that we're operating employee relations within the confines of local ordinance, state law, federal law, and in compliance with all policies and procedures that are on the books. We did have a health plan audit this year. There were 3 material discrepancies, and most of them were, as I say, paper related. It was, we weren't filing the right documents in the right files and those kinds of things, and it sort of reinforced the fact that we need to look at our administrative procedures. We currently have no arbitrations. We've been fairly successful in settling grievances. When we say that 9 of the settlements were a draw, it's because it resulted in many of the letters of clarification. The grievances were the result of language in the collective bargaining agreements that were unclear. And of course, you see all of those because they're reported to you. So when you see on the agenda these letters of agreement, almost invariably they are the result of settlements that are associated with clarifications. Again, attract and retain. We wanted to see how we were doing in recruiting qualified people. We don't want to spend a lot of energy recruiting a lot of candidates for positions that come in and they simply aren't qualified. So we're trying to improve the way we do that. This data is from 630, 66% of applications met the minimum qualifications for the positions. We ran those numbers again yesterday and failed to update the slide, but that number is up to 78%. So we're actually seeing a lot of our efforts pay off in terms of reaching out to candidates that come in and provide us a better pool of recruits.
Thank you. Chris, then Paul, and then Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you. You're the budget chairman. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. One question I had is, how many bargaining units does the city have? Just across the board, counting the school district and just every, the utilities.
I can't speak to the school district,
Okay.
but we have 9.
You have
And
9,
not including non-representative.
so 9 bargaining units. What's the potential of having any of those agreements kind of unified, or are you always looking at 9 agreements, or is there an opportunity there to?
Well,
kind of
there
have
are
some
9.
alignment?
There are 9 groups that are recognized by the Labor Relations Board that have been certified to represent municipal employees in various trade groups. I don't know. It would take a major initiative and an application to do that, but I think that the unions that have been certified represent distinct and unique groups of employees that have common interests.
Okay, I guess what I was looking for is just a standardization on, benefits and kind of all the, days off, all those aspects.
Clearly, they have, fundamentally, there are a number of similarities between the rules that govern employment for a lot of the groups, and we are moving toward more consistency between those. Each group does have unique attributes and unique circumstances that do warrant certain conditions. The guys who go out and clean the streets versus the guys who are putting out fires. Certainly there are some differences, but these contracts, most of the contracts come up in 13 and 14, and I think that certainly a priority will be to work towards finding greater similarity in the basic employment terms and conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paul?
Yes, a couple things. First of all, on the accountability for the grievances, are there any numbers for costs? And what I mean by that is cost of staff time and or any dollars that either were gained or paid out as a result of grievances. And then I guess what I'm trying to find, and you may not have it in front of you, or maybe we have to get it in a different session. So I would ask that you may perhaps take note of that, and I'm interested in that. And secondly, the upfront, I think, kind of tagging along with what Chris was saying first, when you're negotiating, and then we find these grievances, are some of these things that have obviously come into dispute. What's the downstream, and then I guess how do we circle back to make sure that in future negotiations that some of these issues are settled or addressed so that we don't have future grievances. And then, so that would be one, and I'm not sure if there is a mechanism for it. Okay. And then the other thing that I guess that I'm really concerned with, and I'll announce and make sure that the body knows, for purposes of voting, I wouldn't be able to, I'd conflict out because I receive money from, or I'm eligible and I'm a member of the Police and Fire Retirement Trust. But one of the questions I had, it appears that through a legal opinion of the trust, that there's some dispute, and it appears to me that it's more accurate to say that the municipality either ponies up the person at the position that's funded, or they take the money for that person and give it to the trust and let them take care of it. That's the positions appointed by both code and as a result of the trust coming to be as a result of a legal action back then. And so there's essentially some legal precedent as well as code that addresses that. So I'm not sure that this municipality is going to save any funding. I'm quite sure that it won't be any savings, if any, to the taxpayer, because if there's savings to be made, it appears it goes to the trust and not back to the general government fund or to the municipality. Now, I know you may have to address some of these legal things. That's the position it appears.
Very quickly, yes, going back to number one, in terms of the cost for administering grievances, the Labor Relations Division has 3 full-time professionals. We do have an open position in that function, and they're the people who work with the departments and work with the unions in resolving grievances. All grievances that have settlements, that have any cost associated with it, all grievance settlements, one way or another, come to the Assembly. They're either reported to the Assembly, or they are approved by the Assembly if there are any costs associated with it. But I would be happy to get you the aggregated costs associated with that. There really haven't been a lot in that regard. In terms of what happens to these letters of clarification, when there's a grievance, many times we appreciate receiving a grievance because it raises an issue that isn't clear in the contract, and we just need to work through it. You know, a benchmark is I can give you a very quick example that there was a benchmark mentioned, and of course, benchmark by its definition is a snapshot in time, but it didn't have what time that benchmark was going to be taken. So a letter of agreement was put together that as of June 30 of this year, it was a determination of something very simple. Those letters of agreement then become almost an addendum to the contract, and when we go to renegotiate, those changes would be incorporated into the successor agreement if in fact those terms and conditions are going to be addressed. In terms of police and fire, medical, I think Mr. Harmon, that there is a difference of opinion about what is required under the ordinance. And I know that prior to making this suggestion, I did consult with the municipal attorney's office to see what the ability is there. You know, I don't know that $40,000 is worth a prolonged legal battle over this. However, I clearly do believe in my fiduciary responsibility of looking at the costs that taxpayers are paying for these functions that we're overpaying for it right now.
LB.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the audit that was done for health plan, claim dependents, and that there were 3 material discrepancies. And you, I think that I heard you say that the discrepancy had to do with filing paperwork, but I would like some more detail on these discrepancies. Thank you, Mr.
Sure,
Chairman.
the report's available. I'll be happy to provide it to you. The audit was completed some time ago, and I'll be happy to provide you a copy.
Could you tell me right now a little more detail? I'd like a copy, but.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
thank
Essentially, the scope of the audit was that we were trying to get a better feel for, were we carrying dependents on the municipal health plan that were no longer eligible? So for example, if somebody had been divorced or a child had exceeded the number of years that they were able. We requested this audit. We asked to have this audit because we wanted to know how well we were doing in doing this. Primarily what the findings were that the documentation associated with qualifying events, that is marriages, divorces, children coming in, birth certificates, those kinds of things, were not documented in the file. What we had was a checklist. And it really wasn't adequate to demonstrate that we had verified all of the information. I think that was the primary finding associated with this, that we weren't keeping very good records about it. I think it provided us with an opportunity when we did open enrollment last year. We did for the first time require employees to certify their dependents, and by that meaning that they're attesting to it
No, I know what that means. Yeah.
writing. And what we wanted to do was to see if that made a difference. It clearly pointed out that we needed to improve our internal processes in terms of collecting that information and storing that information.
Thank you, and I would like a copy.
Sure, you bet.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does your budget anticipate opening up any labor contract negotiations? And if so, could you specify that the costs are in there, or if they're not in there, how much you think it would cost your department if in fact we are able to reopen or we do choose to reopen some of the labor contracts?
We have, we're currently in negotiations with plumbers, plumbers union, as you know. In 2011, we have several reopeners that are either wage reopeners or benefit reopeners. I believe that none of the major contracts are open, none of them come due that are full contract negotiations. We do have, as I say, reopeners for several of the contracts that we'll be having those, and I believe that we can handle that with our existing staff.
If one of the 5 major contracts was to come open, what other costs would be associated in your department if that presented itself?
I think that we would have to think very carefully when you say one of the major contracts, if it were to break open, which I'm not even, to be honest with you, I'm not even sure how that happens, but if it were to break open and go for negotiation, I would certainly want to think about additional capacity. I mean, we've been thinking in terms of staffing for 2012, 13, and 14. We're already thinking ahead to those years. Is it something that we want to provide some professional contract funding? Do we want to hire up internally? How do we want to do those things? But I think it's the major negotiations are a couple years out. We have a little bit of time. I will say parenthetically that we are, however, what we are doing, we do have a couple of benefit reopeners coming up this year, and we're looking very carefully, monitoring what the effects of healthcare reform are. As you know, our healthcare costs went up significantly this year. A significant portion of that is associated with the additional benefits that are going to be paid under health care reform. It's a projection. We need to monitor that very carefully. And I think that we might very well have some recommendations in terms of reopeners for those benefits on how to do a better job of cost containment.
Anybody else have questions for this department? Thank you.
Barbara. I am Barbara Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission. I guess the first thing that I'd like to tell you, I don't think that there is a slide on this, that our mission at the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission is to eliminate discrimination through enforcement and education. We do that. We enforce the municipality's anti-discrimination law, which is Title V in the municipal code. And enforcement primarily involves investigating cases. And we have about 100 or so cases that we investigate every year. And I will talk about our savings. This year we have, for the 2011 budget, we've eliminated one position. The position has been vacant since 2008. The Assembly put a hiring freeze out in early 2008. We took that seriously. We did not fill the position. It has been vacant since then. And eliminating the position will have a minimal effect on our services. And we have some measures on the next page. We have a federal contract with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We actually have earned about $50,000 under the contract. It was $13,000 more than what we had projected last year. We've increased our case processing, so we've made a little bit of extra money under that contract. They've accepted 100% of our cases in 2008 and 2009. So we think that's a good measure of our success. One of our other measures that I've mentioned there is the age of our cases. It's one of the things that we think the best job we can do is to do our job timely. And we are working hard on reducing the numbers. We've had a couple of blips, but it looks like we're trending. We are hoping to be trending in the right direction. And that's all that I have, unless you have any questions.
Where's the case load? I know you mentioned the numbers that are over. How many cases are we talking about?
Currently, I just did a report yesterday. As of October 31st, we have 107 cases in our caseload.
Elder, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you for what your department did last year, and I think some of this year, going out to community councils and informing them as to what it was your agency did. And I know that they, at least my community council, really appreciated it. Thank you.
Paul, go ahead.
I think, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Paul.
That's good, Paul.
well, I want to join in and thank you. I just recently attended a discrimination dialogue with I believe it was the Department of Justice or, anyway, there was the format up in Mountain View at the new Clark Middle School. And found it to be very informative and certainly very engaging within the community. Followed up with some training at, I believe it was the following day at the Anchorage Police Department's training center, involving many members of the community. And I thought that was very, very positive, very proactive, and hopefully it brings some net results of reducing at least alleged complaints, perhaps by a great percentage. So thank you.
Mr. Trainer?
Barbara, can you give me a listing by the type of cases, alleged cases that you're dealing with?
I can. We report it every year in our annual report, and I detail whether they're employment, housing, financing, and I can tell you off the top of my head that about 95% of our cases are employment. Then we also categorize the cases by basis, whether it's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, physical or mental disability. The largest percent of our cases are race. The next largest percentage, interestingly, are disability. But I do have those exact statistics, and I can provide those to
Could
you.
you send me the email? I'd appreciate it.
I will do that.
And copy the clerk too. Ms. Drummond?
I just wanted to thank Barbara for serving at the Trinity Community Council. You wouldn't know about this except Ernie and I see her every month. She's, I believe, the Secretary Treasurer of the Trinity. Thank you for taking the time in addition to your daily workload.
Well, and thank you for the municipality for allowing me to serve.
Mr. Flynn?
Bill?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, this federal contract has me curious, are they basically delegating cases to you to investigate and then return the results to them for action, or?
Very close. The policy is when someone comes to us and has a complaint of discrimination that would be covered under the federal laws, under federal Title VII or the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act as amended, we're entitled to co-file that case with the federal EEOC. They defer to us, let us complete the investigation. At the end of the investigation, we actually just forward the case closure to them with a request for reimbursement.
Mr. Birch?
I just had just a clarification on the bottom of your slide there, percentage of cases over 240 days old. Does that mean that in 2005, you still have open cases then?
No, that's not what it means.
Okay.
What it means is that as of December 31st of 2005, 57.8% of our caseload was over 240 days. That was a very bad number. So more than half of our caseload was pretty old. So we've been really working hard. We've made some changes in our staffing to make sure that that doesn't happen. And you can see we did a good job addressing it in 2008 and 2009. And I'll just tell you briefly what we did. We have 4 investigators, and we had a staff attorney. And what we've done is I've assumed the duties of the staff attorney and the executive director, and instead we added a 4th investigator position. So now the 4th investigator answers the phone calls. She takes everything that's coming in, which can be extremely time-consuming because people want to tell their story. A lot of times they may not speak English. We have one staff person that speaks Spanish and one that speaks Tagalog. But that is very time-consuming to draft the paperwork and to assist people. So she does that, and the other 3 investigators close the cases. And it's made a significant difference in that age of our cases.
Okay, and just to follow up then, so when you say you have 107 cases, active cases now, how many, are some of those in from, predate this year, or?
A couple of them do, and I do report that in my annual report. So right now, I can tell you, as of October 31st, we had 40 cases over 240 days old. I expect that will drop significantly by the end of this year. And yes, some of them were older than 2010, just a couple, but I do report cases over 400 days old in the annual report as well.
All indications and feedback are you doing a great job there.
Well, thank you very much.
You have an increase in contractual services And then you also specify that your advertising budget's increasing by $1,400 or so. Are those related, or where do you see that number increasing?
Mr. Birch, can you tell me?
Mr. Starr, but
Mr.
that's
Starr,
okay.
I'm sorry, can you please tell me where you're looking?
8-2 in your budget book, which, and I guess, Ms. Fresca, when you talk, other departments have them listed as professional services, and this one says contractual services. We're seeing, typically flat number went up a couple thousand as well as our advertising budget.
I can tell you the only contract that I have is my copier, and that's the only contract that we have.
Those expensive copiers.
It just seems a little bit out of whack that you have a contractual budget of 10
You know-
10 or 12,000 plus your increase in your advertising. So I also have a question about the advertising increase, which is minimal amount, but are we not gaining from the municipal website and some of the electronic media that's essentially no cost?
I'm gonna have to double check that, Mr. Starr, because we don't advertise. There's no advertising. The largest cost that the commission staff has is investigative expenses.
Correct.
And those expenses could involve process servers to serve subpoenas or witness fees, or the cost for interpreters.
Sure.
Those are the largest costs that we have. Otherwise, they're pretty minimal, and I'll
Yeah,
get
just-
with Cheryl about that, because I don't think, the increase that we've had in our non-labor budget, we may have rearranged some money around, and we probably did move it into that other court or investigative expenses, because that's where we're spending the money.
Well, I'm just challenged by the personnel reduction, and we're still seeing a budget increase. It's the money's somewhere, you're going up, $15,000 essentially in your budget, and it's, you're dropping a personnel, isn't that the way I read it?
I don't think so.
Well, we do have the increase in salaries and benefits for the employees that remain, but the increase in contractual is related to we had a request for increased advertising, but we'll certainly follow up and see. Maybe we got lost in translation, but.
Well, it's just, again, you're 677, you were 662 last year, and you're down a person, so, that's.
Yeah, it wasn't a full-time, the cost of the position was $68,000 that was deleted. And then there's the increase for the salaries and benefits. So
Right.
we'll give you more details.
I'll appreciate that. Anybody else have questions? That's all, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Attorney.
Mr. Chairman, Assembly members, my name is Dennis Wheeler, municipal attorney. And slide 1 shows the areas where we're expecting to see some cost changes. What we've done over the last year is focused on trying to bring in more grant money. We have 2 federal anti-gang positions that were largely federally funded by grants. That has diminished over time, but we worked hard to continue to secure that grant funding, so that's reflected in this. As you may know by now, we have a traffic safety resource prosecutor. That's a state grant that comes from the National Highways. We've got that going for us now, and we're working on a justice assistance grant funding in conjunction with APD that helps us out. And on top of that, we have, since we do have the anti-gang staff, we have a right to collect some of the forfeited assets that the convicted defendants have to turn over: cars, cash, and so forth. So for whatever reason, the previous administration hadn't signed up for that. We did. It's nothing like what APD sees, but we still are entitled to a 5% recovery, so we're working on that. We have a few claims in there that we expect to see some return on. As with ER, we're looking at program leave, at least in the civil division. We've thought about doing it in prosecution as well, but because the court system is 24/7, we can't really cover everything we need to cover if we do it there. But both the attorneys and the non-rep staff are looking at program leave this summer. We've dropped a position in criminal, and we've consolidated 2 positions there. And we're looking at putting at least one position down there to a 3/4 time position for some savings. And We were looking at bringing in some in-house expertise on workers' comp claims, because we pay a significant amount of money in attorney fees for contracts. So the increase in our budget here is in part that funding that's transferred from risk management to us. That may not work out because we're not able to hire the person we were hoping to hire because of the salary range difference. So we may end up still having to contract that out. So that may shift back to risk management. So then our budget change will be even more different than what you're seeing here. In terms of accountability, what we have for you is the prosecution stats. It paints an interesting picture. You'll notice that there's a significant climb over time in terms of open cases. At first blush, it may seem alarming, but part of that is that we are focusing more and more on putting persons charged into what we call pretrial diversion. If they complete the requirements of pretrial diversion, they will have their case dismissed. Unfortunately, it takes them longer to comply with getting their license, getting their insurance, completing their alcohol screening, or whatever else may be required of them, so those cases tend to stay open longer. But even with that, there is a trend here where you need to keep in mind that as police staffing changes, so may the prosecution staffing needs to handle the caseload that comes in. So we've been working on trying to track ratios between police staffing and prosecutions to try to maintain an even balance there. We're going to work really hard on keeping the conviction rate up and work with APD on declines and dismissals so that we can make sure to pick those cases up. One of the things that you've done for us in the last year is made some changes with respect to shoplifting so we can send those to the AHO. You're helping us by changing some of the provisions on DUI, vehicle bonds, and we're going to be looking at some of those things to sort of get the same effect in terms of deterrence and prevention of crime and punishment for those who do commit crimes, but with less cost to the taxpayer. So, for example, sending things to the AHO that are smaller level crime, but that have fines attached to it, or community work service can help achieve those goals.
Shelby, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question, maybe you can answer it now, maybe you can't. But what are the IGC charges to the Assembly Department for this year and then for next year?
I'll have to look that up.
May I, Ms. Gray Jackson, if you're following up, because Barbara and I have had the email conversation about that, is that what it's?
Actually, I forgot about that conversation.
Oh.
This just appeared a
Oh,
few
okay.
minutes ago.
Okay, and so
Yeah.
what the issue is that the municipal attorney moved some positions from criminal to civil. Okay, and what that did is it increased the cost of the civil division, and the IGCs that the assembly pays, as well as the rest of us, are based on the civil division's budget. And so thus, there was an increase from previous budgets because these costs shifted, because they more appropriately belonged in the civil division, which impacted the total and therefore the calculation. So is that what your question's concerning?
My question is, what's the amount for this year and then for next year?
For legal?
For IGCs from legal to the assembly?
Okay, we'll get that.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you,
Vyman?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, a couple things. In light of your just previous comment, just before you concluded, the increase or potential increase of police officers and criminal prosecution cases, and yet, it's just saying you're redirecting resources from civil to criminal. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, from criminal to civil, from criminal to civil.
Actually, the resources have always existed, is we're always civil staff people. For whatever reason, the previous administration had them under criminal for budgeting purposes, but they've always been in civil, so there's no change in the allocation of resources. It's just that what I view as correcting who's in which division doing which work.
Mr. Birch.
Great brief, Dennis. One question I had under the top slide there, or top part of that slide, prosecute misdemeanor and traffic offenses under municipal code. What do you see as the percentage that is pushed of your caseload is pushed to either state or federal court? Maybe you got to overlap in case law. I think at one time we were looking at, pushing where we could to either state or federal court to, kind of reduce the load on our municipal resources.
Well, I think, how do I respond to that? I would say that the anti-gang program is designed to allow certain kinds of crimes to be handled in federal court because the penalties are stiffer and longer. And the feds are helping us with that. But other than that, what we have is a scenario where we have misdemeanor code that mirrors a lot of state misdemeanor code. We make the charging decisions under municipal code so that our office handles those. And that was really a historical decision made way back when, that we wanted local prosecution because the theory was that the state had to answer to its constituency on a much larger basis, whereas we can focus on the crimes that we want to focus on within the local jurisdiction. We can prosecute them perhaps faster. We can quickly, through ordinance changes, add new misdemeanor crimes, change the penalties, and better react to whatever the needs might be of the day in terms of criminal prosecution.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Trainee?
So you have any problem retaining your attorneys, given what the state pays versus what you pay for the same job description?
Well, there's always salary pressure. What I'm seeing right now is not so much. I certainly have attorneys that come into me all the time and hope to see a pay raise, but I think what's going to happen is I have a two-tier group, some younger attorneys, and then a more experienced group, if you will. That more experienced group is here because of PERS. And so they're willing to take lower salary than they may be able to achieve on the open market or with the state. When that group retires, I have, as you know, one this year, one next year, at the beginning of the year, and another one I'm anticipating in December. So we'll see what happens when I go out to try to hire. It may be that I'd have to pick up less experienced attorneys.
That's my fear, that we become the training grounds for the state.
It's
Because
always,
we pay
well,
significantly less than the state does,
there's
the
usually
same
more,
type of cases.
yeah, there's usually more turnover in prosecution because you're only handling misdemeanors. So if you want to handle the big trials and do felony work, you're gonna move on to the state. That's just the nature of the structure, not so much the nature of the salary. But there are some attorneys who do leave because of salary, but our turnover rate hasn't been very bad the last 2 years, as far as I can tell. We've only had a
Thanks,
few
Dennis,
go.
appreciate it.
Mr. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wheeler, looking at your measures here, and you mentioned the increased number of open cases related to diversion programs. Does that also explain why the number of cases resulting in conviction are dropping? Are those related? Because diversion is not counting conviction.
Right, if you go through the pretrial diversion process, you end up with you complete it successfully with no criminal record. That's
But-
correct,
but-
yeah.
But it
I don't think
shows-
there's not an exact one-to-one, there may be some other reasons for some minor changes in the conviction rate, but that's the big picture, is that push to use diversion more.
but it still counts as one of your cases, and you're just getting fewer convictions out of that
Right.
pool, okay? And then you've got increasing declines, but decreasing dismissals. Does that just mean you think you're screening better, you're choosing not to prosecute certain cases and therefore not getting thrown out by the court?
You know, the dismissal, the declines are when the case first comes to us, and we screen it to see if we can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So any dramatic changes in the number of declines, you'd want to look at, is the volume of cases, is there something about the manner in which they're presented to us that presents a problem? In terms of dismissals, those are after we've accepted the case. We work out some arrangement with the defendants over some other issue that comes up in the case and we choose to dismiss it.
Thank you, Mr.
Ms. Drummond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wheeler, you mentioned that you were looking to handle workers' comp cases differently, but had trouble due to salary requirements. In other words, the city doesn't offer enough
We had somebody in mind
competitive salary.
We had somebody in mind who has a tremendous amount of experience. The reason we were looking at this in part was because, one, we tend to contract out with a couple of different firms. What we were hoping to do, now that the cost has reached a certain level, is bring that in-house so you have one attorney providing that same service across the board for all the departments. To get some consistency and, of course, experience with our claims and our issues. But yes, the other reason was that one of the leading attorneys that we do use is retiring in January. So that person will no longer be able to contract with. But the person we have in mind that had all the experience that we want in all qualifications wants more than we can pay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thanks for being prepared, Dennis. We're going to the mayor's office?
We are.
Shuffling seats or just?
No, well, Mr. Mayor's
Nope.
going to speak to the
I can
mayor's
speak in there.
Good. I can too, so.
Ours is a fairly straightforward budget proposal. We will be doing more with less.
I think that's all you have?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I have a question, and it's sort of facetious in that regard. You're one of the few budgets that's actually going down from last year's expenditures. And
We
why?
want to lead by example, sir.
You run the rest of the other departments in theory, so why is it this is the only budget really that we're seeing go down?
Well, I think what you're seeing is that, as you know, the executive staff, which the mayor's office has a high amount of executives, are still working under a reduction over when this administration started in 2009. And a lot of the other departments have, the majority of the employees within labor agreements that have increases. So I think that's the main driver.
And there's probably other questions, but I've been hearing in the press, and I've sort of been trying to figure it out in transition of events where this perception that you've just given your executives an over above raise in that. Can you clarify what happened in the time when there was concessions, middle ground? Are they back to even keel as well as it relates to retention?
Well, we're glad to speak to that. When we took office, we immediately implemented a 5% reduction with all executives. Several months ago, we reduced that to a 2% reduction. So they're making more than they were in 2009 and in the first 7 months of 2010, but still not back to the base of where we started in July 1st of 2009.
Even including the last, did you just do a 3%?
Yeah, it went from a 5% reduction to a 2% reduction. So again, if starting from the baseline, they're still working for less than when the administration started. And again, I think that's the only employee group in the city that is working for less. Everybody else has had increases. That being said, in 2009, several bargaining units, the fire department, police department, others took concessions that resulted in real savings to the city. So they're to be applauded for that as well. But since that time, the increases in a 5-year contract overwhelm that within just a year or two.
I've got another question, but I'll let Mr. Trainee go for a minute.
Just to clarify, the assembly department took the same reduction, did not get a pay in return. They took the 5%, they absorbed the 5%.
But our budget's higher this year than it was last
Because
year.
of contractual requirements,
I
not
see.
because the salary paid to our employees. That's not gone up.
Contractual, well, we'll talk a bit when we talk assembly budget. I
We can
don't
talk
want
about it.
I don't want to be misquoted in which budget's going down, which ones aren't, but when you look through the budget book, there's very few that actually
We're
go
just talking
down.
about pure salaries.
Yeah.
Ours did not take the 3% increase or 3% reduction, call it what you want.
I got it. When I go into this office, Mr. Mayor, next door, there's more than you have 11 personnel, I think. Now, I see now that you're proposing 8. There's more bodies than that are actually working over
Yeah,
there.
we're actually going down from 9 full-time to 7 full-time and 1 part-time.
Some of the others, just to educate me, where are some of the others being paid? I had the
Well,
same.
you have the municipal manager's office shares the west end of the 8th floor with us.
Mhm.
So there's some, I guess, I won't say commingling, but we share a similar space area. And so I think some people don't quite know who are municipal managers, employees, and who are mayor's office.
Right, I don't, so I mean, I just maybe get a clarification on that. Special assistants listing as well, could you maybe send me and copy the clerk on the people that have special assistant, or I don't know what you guys call them, in discretionary appointments? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
We'd both do that.
just send that to me and maybe copy the clerk. Anybody else have any questions for the mayor?
I have one.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just was curious about the decision to drop the Covenant House grant. Is there any particular reason?
The decision actually will affect pretty much our whole grant proposals for nonprofit groups. Again, we're looking to cut $15 million from a continuation budget that typically has to spread across all departments and all grantees. So it's part of the solution to the problem.
That's not the whole grant, though. Did you clarify your question?
There's a reduction.
Reduction, yeah, in the grant. Okay. Mr. Holman?
Well, then, does anybody knows, anybody told us what the impact of that program will become, or do they have a plan to make up the difference in the loss? You know?
I can answer that. They don't, at this point, they don't have a plan, and if they don't get the dollars they need, they'll reduce the service.
Thank you.
That's the youth reception center where the cops take the kids.
Thank you.
They actually get grants from more than one department out of the city as well, so.
All right.
Okay, the next department is the Office of Management and Budget. And I'd like to point out the 2.3% reduction when you compare 2011 to 2010. But the way we were able to achieve that is the mechanism that Ms. Mahoney explained last work session regarding one of our analysts' time is going to be spent on the ERP implementation. So we're able to charge some of his time to a capital project. So that is the way. And in terms of our accountability, I think you're familiar with our mission in terms of implementing and managing the budget throughout the year. And we have several accomplishment goals. One of them, some of you may be familiar with the government finance officers. They have a distinguished award for budget presentation. And currently, the finance department, the controller shop, they received this kind of a distinction for the comprehensive annual financial report. And so our goal is to also achieve that for the budget presentation, because one of the criteria is the ability to provide in user-friendly way budget information to citizens. So we think that's important, and it is something that we want to work toward. We feel real fortunate because one of our analysts actually reviews the budgets for GFOA of other communities and states and cities around the United States. So we feel we have a good critical eye already that will help us towards that.
Not a plan?
Pardon?
Not a plan?
No, I do it as seizing the opportunity and expertise. So you're familiar with our accountability initiative, PBR, that we're working with the departments to advance the mayor's initiative. And also, of course, while we're doing our service, we want to make sure that we're meeting the service requirements of our clients, which are all the departments. And then fourth goal is improving the department's understanding of the IGC system, which of course is probably mission impossible, but we still want to work towards that. And so what I've included here is our, we did do a customer service survey this summer. And frankly, I think our timing probably wasn't the best because we were in the middle of reduction scenarios with all the departments. But overall, I think we did okay considering what we were having to put them through. So it gives us a baseline in terms of our customer service, and it gives us some areas in which to improve the way in which we do our business every day. So that's it. Any questions?
Mr. Honeman has one.
Yeah, Ms. Braska, I guess a question, first of all, on the commentary, rather than getting some feedback from community councils, might be helpful for the office. But one is there a plan to return to a service level funding categorization so you can spell it out for people like myself who spend a number of years using and operating that kind of system? And then the comment is that I hope there is, because many people in the community councils and folks that I've talked with, they see this as, looking at the book, is yes, there's information, but it's very difficult to track when you take the whole and then shake it up and throw it on the table and say, here's our money and here's how we spend it. Any questions? And so to get into service levels and actually describe what you're getting for the money, and if you want more, here's what you can get. And if you want to shuffle things around, you could replace this with that. And that might perhaps help with our community dialogues when we're going around talking to constituents. Have you found the same commentary, or?
Well, Mr. Honeman, I also served in OMB when there were service levels, so I definitely appreciate the level, the quality of the information that you got. You could understand it. But over the last several years, there was a replacement to the budget system, which makes it impossible for us to produce service levels. The budget system is not built that way. The good news is, hopefully, with the ERP and whatever budget module that is available, it will produce some kind of information that's similar in nature. I can't say it's gonna be just like the service level blocks, but it helps you understand the building blocks of how you build a budget. So I appreciate what they want. I would also suggest that you might wanna look at the general government operating budget presentation from 2 years ago, and it might help you appreciate the level of information we've added to the budget. It's grown about double. So that was, again, trying to advance a little bit more information. So I understand your point.
Thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson and Mr.
Thank you,
Flynn.
Mr. Chairman. Cheryl knows how I feel about service numbers too, so I'm
Yeah.
really glad to hear that when the ERP comes into place, that we'll have something. And I just wanted to mention that the OMB director before you had a similar goal of attaining the GFOA Distinguished Award, and I'm just really glad that you're continuing to pursue it, because I think that we by all means qualify for it. I just wish it wasn't going to take to 2012. Maybe we'll get it before. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cheryl, on the first question of your survey, is that third word supposed to be communicates?
Well, no, it's a budget term.
Creative language.
I'm surprised you scored that high, given the way it's raised.
Yes, mister. Yes. So no, I'm gonna send it to you to edit next time.
Curious.
That's all you had, was that gouge to the
That's all I had,
reference of
yeah.
that?
Having a little fun, yeah.
I have a question about your role when it comes to legislative priorities and the lobbying. You've taken out your travel budget, essentially, the $4,000, which I assume was maybe travel to Juneau. If you don't show a line item for travel. And what's your role in legislative priority, and who goes down to make sure that negotiating team has the latest and greatest numbers, and how do you share that? I mean, I want to make sure we get adequately represented down there.
Well, that's all directed by the mayor's office and
So you IGC and if you go down to Juneau?
well, we meet together up here, and I think we have a good team that advocates for Anchorage and Juneau.
Are you going to go down there?
Don't have any plans.
There's not anybody that you would take to Juneau to help explain this stuff?
Well, we don't typically, have to explain our whole capital budget. We put together, through Stacy Schubert's direction and with the Chief of Staff's assistance, a legislative package that narrows down what our priorities are and has explanation sheets of each of them. And OMB certainly is a great resource to help us put that together. But once it's assembled, we like to think that it's fairly clear and understandable, and then with the help of Stacy and Larry in particular down there and with our lobbying team, we're able to explain, and again, I think last year's success showed that we were able to get our priorities pretty well explained to the legislature.
Well, and the only comment was, again, it's a compliment in there somewhere. Ms. Fresk's got the skill and I believe the experience to bring that forward, as a lot of your executives are very high skilled. I appreciate the transition from what you've taken on, as well as the improvements to the budget book. So I'm always making a goal this year to, as opposed to Mr. Flynn, I'm looking for the good stuff too. And I've been very impressed with the answer flows as well as this process. Now we're on our second public hearing coming up Tuesday night. You're on your second assembly presentation, and the answers seem to be pretty forthcoming, the offline answers and the organization they're in. So I appreciate that. If there's any critiques from the assembly people as it relates to that, obviously, I would want to address them. But thank you very much for being prompt. Helps us.
For Juneau, the Cheryl's our secret weapon. Only if we get in a real bind, we bring in the heavy lifting there. So.
I just want to clearly explain. So, Mr. Flynn, you're going down on our behalf, so you need to have.
Really don't have another game yet.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, now we need a little shift for the next group to come.
We run prompt meetings here, so
Okay.
be sure. Yeah.
All right. Fire, police, Jody. Well, but they can all sit up here.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I saw you moving. Paul, fire.
Just step down.
Okay.
Hey, before the meeting started, I was a little late. Did you guys talk about the revised schedule today with the enterprise budgets being taken out? I want to take some time because I want to flesh out this
You're the
budget
chairman.
and the fire department
I just got the
budget.
meeting started on time.
I appreciate that. I was trying to. And
You know me, if a meeting starts at 11, it starts at 11.
I want to just take a minute to explain, the schedule has been somewhat revised. Mr. Flynn, at the request of the Budget and Finance Committee, held enterprise discussions with the enterprise agencies and the groups like MLMP and AWU on Monday. That was about a 3-hour work session, so we've actually had an opportunity to free up a little bit more time. And I did that just basically to give those departments time to flesh it out, as well as I didn't see today having enough time for that. But part of the gain in that is to give the departments that may have more detailed requirements to present their time, I would suspect both police and fire. So I don't know, Ms. Fresca, what you felt in terms of a time frame, but I want to go till we're exhausted in the questionings and the strategies, and so it may get lengthy here on purpose. So
Yeah, we've got 2 hours.
that's right, and so if we can just, obviously get that discussion to the point where we're all comfortable, it may take a while, so, thank you. Have a
Okay, Mr. Manager.
Well, thank you, Mr. Starr, and I hope you're not gonna get lengthy on my benefit, but we'll go from there. As you can see on the chart, in 2010, our budget, as adjusted because of some reorganization, was $21,186,000. And then in 2011, we're proposing $20,638,000, and that's a reduction of $547,000. Now, how did some of these things occur? We basically had 14 full-time and 2 part-time, as you can see, in 2010. And then during 2010, as a result of reorganization of the Office of Community Planning and Development, we picked up 2 positions and eliminated 2 positions and transferred 1 position. So as a result of that, our net gain in the municipal manager's office was 2 personnel. The manager's office includes divisions, and you can see the divisions listed there: emergency management, risk management, safety, transportation inspection, and then, of course, the office of the municipal manager. Next slide, please. To further explain how we came up with a $500 and some cut, as I mentioned, originally, the Office of Community Planning and Development was 5 people, and that was Greg Jones, Jennifer Allen, and support staff. When the reorganization occurred, the functions of that organization was transferred to the municipal manager, with the exception of 1 person. And that 1 person was the arts person, that person that takes care of all the 1% for art as far as monitoring the program, making sure that the property is maintained, inventoried properly, etc. However, 4 positions was transferred to the municipal manager's office, and 2 of those positions were eliminated. The 2 positions transferred was the director, Greg Jones, and the deputy director, Jennifer Allen. So therefore, there was a savings as a result of that of about $363,000. In addition to that, because of some technology enhancements, we're able to basically receive a benefit of a $5,600 savings. And then, it's already been covered by the municipal attorney. The intent was that we were spending around $350,000 a year in outside attorney costs associated with workers' comp. Our feeling was, and in conference with the attorney, that we could probably do it a lot cheaper. So we had transferred approximately $250,000 to the municipal attorney's office to hire a person and some support staff. And that meant that we could basically cut $100,000. As you heard earlier, that's yet to be determined, so we'll see how that goes as far as being able to obtain an attorney for that purpose within the municipal attorney's office. As far as impact on services, as you know, the grants are handled in a couple of different places, many different places actually, but as far as on the 8th floor, the mayor has a few, and then most of the community grants and the arts grants are found in my budget. We basically have reduced it to 30% of what it was, and that makes $370,000 for both the arts as well as the community grant. Next slide, please. So what's the municipal manager's mission? Well, first of all, I am responsible for the day-to-day operations of the municipality and the administrative functions. How do I do that? I do that by directly overseeing 11 departments and 4 divisions plus a support staff. The accomplishment goals really are around efficiency and effectiveness. And also to ensure that when complaints, concerns, inquiries come to the municipal land manager's office from however they come, and they come from a myriad of different ways, that they're dealt with in a timely manner, and hopefully a resolution can be put in place within 72 hours. If not a resolution, at least a process to resolve the problem within 72 hours. So that's a goal that we have set. Next slide, please. So specifically within the municipal manager's office, what we're really looking at is overseeing and ensuring and monitoring that each one of the departments that I had mentioned earlier, the 11 departments and the 4 divisions, appropriately meeting their goals. So we're monitoring, encouraging, guiding, whatever it takes to make sure all of our departments meet their goals. So that's goal number 1, that every year that we improve in their goals. We meet them and we improve. And then measure 2 is what I alluded to earlier, and that is to deal with the situations that we're confronted with by primarily constituents of yours, and try to resolve their issues within 72 hours. When I say resolve, I mean resolve the issue. And in some cases, there are issues that takes longer than that, but there will be a process put in place within that 72 hours to resolve that issue. So that's my goal. Next slide, please. And then next, just as an example of one of the divisions that's under the municipal manager's office, and that's, of course, the safety division. And we can track on all kinds of different things from years back to where we are now. And our goal is to improve these statistics and many, many others that we have set up. But this is just an example of how we set out to improve, monitor and improve any way we can in these categories and others. And this is just an example. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Horniman?
Yes, I was noticing on the, I do see that there's some decline, thankfully, in the general liability, both in the numbers and the dollars, as the example used for safety, but I did notice a huge amount increase in auto liability in 2009, and what appears to be at least a rise from dollar costs from 2007. It looks like 2008 may have been an anomaly, I hope, for workers' comp. The question is on all of these claims, are there funds that are directed or dedicated to the municipal manager's office to pay for those, or are those monies taken from, for lack of better terms, the division or departments that are responsible for repairing the claim? Well, some of them are in the manager's office, absolutely. To address some of them are. To address your concern about the increase, if you remember, we had a major incident where a bus hit an individual from the district. And the injuries to that individual were very, very costly. And that pretty much was one of the major significant things that caused it. It only takes one incident, as you know. The anomaly that you see sometimes is if you can decrease the number of claims, man, you really feel like you're sitting fat, dumb, and happy. But unfortunately, when medical costs go up, even though the number of claims go down, medical costs go up. So our goal is to try to bring them both down, of which we have more control of the number of incidents than we do on the medical costs. The second part, is there, since I know I believe we're self-insured, I don't know if it's the same, do we have either a catastrophic plan that covers any high dollar costs like these anomalies? And then all the rest of them, the majority of those, are those in a budget at the municipal manager level to pay, or do those monies come from IGCs or direct costs coming from the departments in which might be responsible, like people move with a bus crash or a police car crash or a... They're in the municipal manager's budget, like I say, for the most part.
Pretty much everyone's got questions, so I think we'll just start with Ms. Drummond and kind of go around this way.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Michaelis, back on the first page, I thought I heard you say that the community and arts grants were reduced to 30%.
No, they were reduced by 30%. By 30%,
Okay.
which
So
left
missing
available,
word there.
which left available 370,000.
So it was reduced by 30%,
That's correct.
which is missing from this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Michaelis, you mentioned that, you work with our constituents and your goal is to deal with situations within 72 hours. And I just want to take this opportunity. As you know, I work with a lot of folks within departments that are under you, and I really want to thank you and them for the good job they do working with me and my constituents. I've been doing this for 2.5 years, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just had a question on the workers' comp, the number of claims, 550 claims. What are those slips, trips, falls, just from a safety standpoint, workers' comp, how are people injuring themselves?
Primarily, it slips, trips, and falls, absolutely. And whether we like it or not, that's pretty much across the board. About every place you go, it's slips, trips, and falls. We need to do a better job of making people aware of what they're doing.
I was just gonna suggest, for $3.5 million, if it's the majority of slips, trips, and falls, it might be we could buy everybody a, something for their, slide on over their shoes or something to avoid that. Yeah, I don't know, how do we?
But it's also inside facilities as well.
Inside. Great, thank you.
Ernie, anything?
My question's been answered.
I was just looking as far as your reduction in constituent complaints, and I understand why, I kind of understand why you're starting at 2011, but there were no statistics before 2011 as far as how that's addressed, or have you, I guess some of it's by assembly and some of it's by the ombudsman, but do you have any idea?
Well, first of all, I did not know that the assembly complained ever, so I guess I didn't factor that in. But, if you remember what I said earlier was, regardless of where they come from, okay? We certainly get, I guess I'd break them into 3 categories. A lot of questions, inquiries. Number 2, concerns. In other words, I saw something happen over there. Can you tell me what that was, and is that right, or can we fix that? And then the other one is, I've got a complaint. I've tried to get this through the process, and it's been delayed. What do I need to do? How can you help me? So those are kind of the 3 types of issues we're dealing with. And so, to tell you the truth, we do not have any consolidated place where those were ever captured, because they can come into an individual within a department, they can come into the department head, they can come into the mayor's office, they can come into each and every one of you, and a whole bunch of them come directly to me. So what we're doing is coming in and we're developing a process where we can monitor where those are coming from and what they are, and then how adequately we are addressing them. So that's what that means.
Mr. Trainee?
Thank you. Quick question for you, George. The mayor said earlier that he reduced all the executive salaries by 5% and then gave back 3%. Is that everybody in your department executive also that is now working for 2% less than their predecessor was?
Everyone in my department that are executives took a 5% decrement, and they were plus back 3%.
So everybody's working for 2%
I have one
less.
individual, if you're talking about at the top level, and then plus administrative staff, there's one individual that is a non-rep, and then the rest are executive level.
Thank you, George.
Maybe Ms. Fresca's better to explain. On 18/12, it talks about Fund 602 as a surplus. It looks like you're treating it as a surplus revenue account. I'm having trouble reconciling the 602 fund at the plus 368 as it relates to 18.3 down at the bottom of your net cost. It has to do, I believe, with your workman's comp IGC transfers over in that, but if you're growing your fund by $368,000, which is down from $618,000 net, is that a surplus of collections from workman's comp by department, or what is that number?
Well, Mr. Stark, what it is, it's down about 300,000 from 2010. It's a decrease. And that's because those funds were transferred to the attorney's office. And so it's a revenue source that's supporting risk management. And so how we listed it there is that in 2010, current year, 618,000 came from Fund 602 to support the direct cost budget. but in 2011, it's 368,000, and the difference is the attorneys.
But where that money comes from, isn't it not the workman's comp charges by department
Yes.
on 18.3, which I'm having challenges because you're basically IGC in every department a couple $100,000 more. You're returning less to that. Does that mean we have our workman's comp costs under control, or am I missing why that's even linked together?
You're not missing why it's linked together, but actually it's more in the first quarter, once 2010 will have ended. And then for first quarter budget amendment process, we'll establish what the charge out needs to be to all the departments for risk management purposes. And so that's when we'll get the true numbers, because the fiscal year will have ended, we'll have real numbers as to what the balance in Fund 603 is, and that's when we can determine how much needs to come back into the fund to meet the expected obligations, so.
But you're
kind of a
anticipating then
timing
that
issue.
there's going to be a healthier contribution to 603 then? Because the way I see it is you got a $500,000 issue here. You got 200,000 of increased budget numbers, and you're returning back into the fund about $300,000 less. If I add those two together, am I not on that train of thought? Where's the money going?
Well, some of the money comes to support risk management division, and what this is saying, that there's 300,000 less out of that fund that's going to be supporting the division, risk management, okay? In terms of the numbers on page 18 dash whatever it was, 13 or something.
Right.
But if you want an analysis of the fund's balance, is that what the projected
Well,
year
that
end
plus
is?
the workman's comp cost that you're appropriating by department is up over $200,000. So what I see is a drop to the revenue fund in 602, ultimately transferred into 603, but I also see higher workman's comp costs allocated to each department. That just doesn't jive to me unless we have a trending increase in workman's comp claims, or you guys are forecasting something else that's not here. Is there?
Well, we have two people who want to answer you.
I asked you the question, but if you have somebody else, then go ahead.
I just wanted to add that George and I just recently met on the status of Fund 602, which is the internal service fund that captures these accounts here.
Right.
And we are looking at it in regard to where we are year-to-date 2010, as well as the forecast to the end of the year. And we are assessing the impact on the fund balance, if you will, in regard to just that fund, so that we can better understand where we'll be at the end of the year and then how it will impact us in 2011. And that analysis is underway right now as we speak.
Well, as in all revenue forecasting, it's just that process that you described that gives me the accurate numbers. But, you know, when we're getting right down to brass tacks and other revenue things, a $200,000 or $250,000 shift in revenues one way or the other would be important to me to know. So,
And that's what we are looking at.
when will you think we'll have that information?
Well, we started it Wednesday, and so I would imagine mid-next week, well, the controller's department is reviewing this in combination with doing a year-end forecast.
Mhm.
I can imagine that's hard, because, I mean, just as of 2 days ago, we had another incident. And so, you know, we assume one number, but it could turn into another. So-
Well, again, to me, it's what we're gonna have to do adjustments on first quarter to our fund balance, and if we're getting pressures on those already, I haven't talked today about Fund 181, but we've got pressures in the building fund, and now if you're telling us there's pressures on another fund, then we wanna make cognizant sure that we're able to meet our fund balance reserves as well as our requirements. And so for me, I'm watching that number, and it's the same conversation I had a year or two ago on watching that fund balance number not erode to the point of fiscal health of the city. So that's why I brought it up. And
We are on the same page.
all right, well, I've got to approve a budget here in about 3 weeks, and so we got first quarter adjustments already. We should put them in this budget, is what I think, but we'll talk more about that. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to detail the question off track, but you handled it pretty well, and I'm a little clearer, but if you can keep us up to date, maybe the entire assembly on 603, and then when we have a chance to yak about 181, I'll do more of that too.
Okay, now when you say 603, you understand that's the health insurance fund.
Well-
602 is the auto and the general liability. Those are different.
You said 603, I was talking about 602, okay.
I misspoke and said.
It is 602.
602 that you're speaking.
We're looking at
We
603 also.
The direct report now, without a Greg Jones in the mix, you have direct report then to Mr. Thompson and Mr. Weaver. And I'm challenged a little bit by their budget presentation prior to us wasn't very quantitative in their goals and achievements. by, we will turn a permit in such and such, 24 hours after we get this request or that. It's fairly loose. Conjunction with now we're raising the fees and the expectations on inspector fees are going to be more charged to the industry. What are you doing in a department? Are you stretched too thin now to be able to manage that group with that transition? Or are you anticipating putting an interim person in there like we used to have an assistant city manager per se? I'm concerned that you're not going to have your pulse on that because you're only one guy.
I think we can handle it.
Weekly meetings with them, or what can we be assured that you're having? 'Cause
Okay, yes. Do I have weekly meetings? You bet I do. I have a weekly meeting with actually those two groups together to include the division managers, and we go over the issues. Number two, I'm in daily contact with those two department heads. In fact, even most of the division managers every day, by telephone or meetings in my office going over issues. And as I stated earlier, we are in the process of gathering a mechanism and a process so we can monitor all these issues that come up from folks and concerns.
I'll give you one, for example, Walgreens is in town,
I understand.
Now, are you in the loop on that, or how do we get a response back to Walgreens?
I am in the loop in more ways than we could imagine,
All
yes.
right. My instructions were to start with Mr. Weaver and then move up to you, but in that regard, timely response to our constituent base, our economic platform, I've got to know, based on now some of these changes, with Mr. Jones, it was easy to say, here's how I get my problem solved. And
But I'm assuming that are you making the assumption it's not easy working with me?
No, not yet. I just haven't started that process yet, so, and I emphasize the yet, so. I appreciate that. I look forward to it, but I just don't want to have the excuse that, well, look we incurred a budget cut, or not that you would do that, but if you're adequately staffed and you can handle that transition, then I'm there for you. But if there's a
Mr. Starr, I
modification
will
to your
do
budget,
everything that it takes.
appreciate that answer. Anybody else? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Honeman?
It occurs to me a James Bond movie, Dr. No, envisioning that, so don't be, anyway. I did note here, and I just wanted to, I guess, more for clarification, it doesn't have to be today, so it's likely will take either one of you two to help me figure this out, but am I to understand that the Fund 602 for the liability workers' comp, I see in the next page over 1813, program generated revenue, the number is strangely the same for 2011. It looks like it carries across. Am I assuming that that's the Fund 602 comes from those four funds? Reimbursed costs, cash pool, short-term interest, other short-term interest, and unrealized gains and losses? Okay. So if I can get just a quick explanation of particularly the two in the middle. Well, actually, all that category would be great. So,
Which category?
well, the funds that make up 602, I'm having just a little grasp. I see some of these numbers and they go up, and like you say, there's a 50% decrease for projected or proposed 2011. What does that mean? Is it short-term interest on some monies that are in an account somewhere, I take it? I mean, that would make sense to me, but I want to make sure I'm on the right track.
And through the chair, Mr. Holman, because with the information under the program generated revenues, it really is more the fund sources that are used to support the operation. It doesn't mean that this is all of the cash pool short-term interest for the whole city. Well, in this case, it's how much of their fund earned. So these are fund sources. It's not the full revenues in that account necessarily.
So let me just use one example then. The cash pool short-term interest, 9761. Does that directly go to supply money to Fund 602?
It's supporting the function of the risk management division, the direct cost budget up above.
Right.
Okay, so that fund, monies in that fund are supporting the division. Yeah, so all of these fund sources
But
support.
as I heard you just say, that 9761 may have more money in it than that, and part of it goes to another division, program revenue or something. So that's, I
We'll
don't
get to
know how you guys do it, but I'd like a little breakout. Thank you.
I think we exhausted it for the public meeting portion of it. We'll talk all this afternoon, so.
Public transportation.
Hi, I'm Jody Carrs, the Public Transportation Director. This is Yoni Alaterbo, who is our finance guy. Our budget actually reflects a reduction of 4 staff members. 3 of those would come from our bus operators, and 1 would be a maintenance person. We have some efficiencies that we are taking advantage of. Our fleet is becoming newer as we replace some of our older buses. They tend to be less labor intensive, and we are experiencing some parts savings. So we're proposing to reduce our parts budget by about $130,000 because of that. Like Mr. Vacalis, we also have some phone technology savings that we're taking advantage of. We are still, in addition to having a fare increase that we proposed a couple days ago, or last week, we are talking about some reductions to people mover services. Of which the reduction in services, there's actually three kind of general areas where we're proposing to make reductions. The first one would be early morning and late evening service on some routes. The other one would be select peak hour trips on 3 different routes, the 8, I believe the 36 and the 102. And then finally, eliminating the 45G service. A couple of years ago, we have a Route 45 that operates between downtown through Mountain View and down to the Alaska Native Medical Center through the UAA area. We always had crowding on that route. That route is incredibly productive. We would often have people who couldn't get the bus and we bypass them. So we added in some trips that just went from downtown to Mountain View and then to Glen Square Mall and came back. Those would be the 45G trips. We're proposing to eliminate those because those were fill-in trips. By eliminating them, somebody can still ride the bus within 15 minutes of their original trip time. We do expect there are going to be some folks that we will have to bypass again if the buses get too crowded, and we'll bypass them. One of the things we are looking at doing is taking a Route 8 that operates along the 5th and 6th Avenues and kind of the northern part of the city by Northway Mall, and maybe run them up into Mountain View or part of Mountain View to handle some of the crowding issues.
Didn't you just say you were cutting 8?
No, we would move parts of
Cutting.
8.
So you should have said you were cutting some runs. Did you not?
Oh, no, 45G.
You said you were cutting some runs on 8, reducing some off-peak runs.
Oh, a peak hour trip. A peak hour trip on the Route 8, a peak hour trip on the 36, and a peak hour trip on the 102. Sorry.
Say again, Route 8?
Route 8, Route 36, and Route 102. A peak hour trip on those 3 routes. And then the 45G, and then the early morning and late evening service on different routes. 1, 2, 3, 13, 15, and 36. And I believe those were produced in one of the books that.
In your citizens guide, Mr. Chairman, there is, if you take one of the routes that we're changing, it tells you how much, if you have to wait 30 minutes or an hour, based on what time you normally catch the bus.
Is that all you had, Mr. Horniman? Do you need another question?
Well, I didn't know if she was done, I just wanted to
Oh.
be on the list.
You're next.
Oh, very good. Ms. Carson, of course, like the municipality started with people mover in the maintenance section. I'm familiar that really the city's public transit is really just that. It's not a mass transit or a rapid transit. And one of the concerns communities, residents have is if we're trying to increase ridership, and I noticed that there's an increase for marketing and customer service, which is adequate. I'd like to see that continue, to try to encourage ridership. The community dialogues that went through this past summer almost overwhelmingly said, don't cut public transportation. And yet at the same time, we're seeing this as a recommendation from the administration. So I'm not sure if it's directed more towards you, I suppose, since you're the director of the services, as towards it. I'm not sure if you were at any of these dialogues. I don't recall. I went to all 3 of them. The one's not specially invited. I'm having a hard time with my constituents reconciling when they clearly are saying overwhelmingly they didn't want to see a cut public transportation. And we're talking not a huge amount of money, and yet a drastic impact, and particularly in some of these routes here, for people who do ride, and much less trying to increase ridership. So it's not adding, the math for me is not adding up. I guess maybe it's a comment. I don't know, it's a question whether, has anybody looked at the dialogue, trying to compare what the public is actually saying about public transportation, and then, yeah, we're proposing to reduce it.
I did go to one of those meetings. I think we've got a budget shortfall citywide, and this is the best way I could look at, you know, of where if we would have to make cuts, where would we make those cuts? And this is the best area, I think, that we're facing.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could add, the challenge here was that we had to add almost $840,000 of an increase in order to cover the salary and benefit costs. Okay, and so overall, the department has a slight increase in 2011. So, you know, it's a game of, it's choices and trade-offs. And so that's the challenge. It's gonna cost us more for those bus drivers, and we're gonna have three fewer of them.
For a number standpoint, I recognize the economics. For a ridership standpoint, and recognizing that public transportation has always been a subsidized program area. It never has paid for itself and likely never will. We receive a lot of federal dollars in the way of grants and funding. To my knowledge, we don't have, in fact, maybe for the lobbying for both the Assembly, Mr. Flynn, I'd be more than willing to accompany or assist, but, and for the Mayor's office, I'd recommend that we look at our state folks and acknowledge that this state is one of 2 or 3 nationwide that I'm aware of that funds nothing for public transportation. And yet, a lot of our folks are relying on the public transportation system. And frankly, I think that's an area we need to be addressing. But the community dialogues clearly stated most people in the community, you know, and frankly, they don't care what extra cost it is to it. I mean, we may increase some fees and fines. I'm aware of that. I'm on board with most of them. My concern is that we're hearing from the constituents, and the dialogue says overwhelmingly people don't want to see a reduction in people with the transit system.
Mr. Holman, you know, let Jody explain to you what that really means by eliminating some of those routes.
Well, I saw in the book, I saw some of the
But
things.
let him have a chance to do it.
Sure.
So if you looked at the book, you could see, you know, where people are would have to adjust. Sometimes it's 15 minutes, it could be up to an hour in certain situations. The 45G, I've been getting a lot of phone calls from the 45G as well, because those trips, they do carry good ridership. But especially on those, there's a bus 15 minutes early before that, or 15 minutes after that. And a lot of those people are gonna be able, a lot of those riders on that route are gonna be able to shift their trip by 15 minutes. And we have a lot of those where it's you know, within an hour at the most, they'd have to shift.
And, you know, again, the challenge I realize recognizing the economy and the numbers that is projected, I really frankly don't believe I don't have the same feeling, but that's not for you and me, it's for a feeling of policy and where we're gonna put the budget at finally. But the process for me is that if we've gotta tell a rider that their commute time is gonna be akin to if they were living in the valley and driving their own car in and out, it doesn't encourage people to join ridership in the people system. And that just continues to spiral downward our ridership. It's just a mistake.
Mr. Trainee?
Where to start? How much do you need? We move money around. How much do you need to keep the system viable? It's $840,000. How much do you need to keep it viable? And it's not a game.
I believe the budget book said because our prices have increased, our costs have increased about 800,000. Cheryl, would that be the?
I don't know what viable means. I mean, does that mean restore to what we're doing this year?
Well, like Route 45G, I'm concerned because it's affecting real people's lives. We've got one of our own employees who works down the second floor that will not be able to get here on a normal scheduled time to be here because this will get here in what, Barbara, half an hour late to work? What?
It's either 15 minutes or half an hour.
And that's just one person that works here, I know of. My concern is, what does it cost in real dollars for this body to make the decision to keep that route going? Because I know on Tuesday, we had the people with the yellow last Tuesday from the library. The people with little buses are coming in. And I want to know exactly what we're talking about.
Well, I think it would be, Jody, correct me, but the 365,000, right, is related to the schedule changes. So the 365 is all of the schedule changes, if you want to go back to the current schedule. Does that sound right?
The early morning and late night service is about 190,000. The select peak hour trips, the 8, the 36, the 102, that's about 60,000. And then the 45G is 130,000. Does that add up? I think that adds up to right about there.
Go over those one more time, please.
Sorry? Oh, the early morning and late evening is 190. The select peak hour is 60, and the 45G is 130.
If you can give me an email with the breakdown, I'd appreciate it. Because as we're going through budget considerations, we've got to talk to the mayor's office because this is a game that both sides play, strategic planning on where we're going with this. I want to be able to know what type of dollars you can put into this. Is it a picture of people's lives? A lot of us have multiple cars. I know we're going to pay more under the new fines and fees for multiple cars. But we have that option. Some of these people don't. The only way they can get around town to go to the doctor, to work, is catching the bus. Down here it says suggested donation for seniors on Anchorage is going to $350 from suggested donation. Do we just require suggested donation now?
No, just for seniors. Another proposed cut that we have, a reduction in this budget, would affect Anchor Rides. And Anchor Rides is, we do People Mover bus service, we do a share a ride carpool and vanpool program, and we do Anchor Rides for seniors and people with disabilities. What we're proposing with this scenario is we would reduce our funding for senior citizens by about $240,000. We are required under ADA to provide all trips to people with disabilities who qualify under the Americans with Disabilities Act. We get funding, I think last meeting, you guys approved a $575,000 grant that we got for senior transportation, which pays for about the half of our senior trips. We're proposing reducing the other half of senior trips, but we recognize a lot of people who are seniors are also eligible under ADA. So we anticipated 40% of the people who ride as a senior are also eligible under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we would continue to, if people would shift their trips to qualify under ADA, and then they would pay their fare if they became an ADA trip. The money we get from the, that you approved the other night from the state, that money requires you cannot charge a fare. It has to be a suggested donation.
Okay.
And then going forward, senior trips will primarily be funded by federal and state grants and not by municipal funding.
Okay. You mentioned vanpool. Do we pay any tax dollars into vanpool, or is that all federally funded?
The vanpool program is federally funded, and the majority of it is paid for out of user fees. Now, the money that we put in would be local match for the vehicles.
Does that include the vans that go out to the valley every morning?
Yes.
What's our percentage of the money we put into that? How many dollars are we talking about?
About 10%, first of all, it's no operating dollars. It's just the 10% match for the vehicles.
How
And
much are we talking about?
a vehicle is about 40,000, so it'd be 4,000 a vehicle. The life of the vehicles, they're 4-year vehicles, but we stretch them to use them for 6-year vehicles. I did ask, we submitted an application to the state for their 2012 State Transportation Improvement Program to have the state pay the entire cost of those vehicles.
So does the Mat-Su Valley help in this at all?
Last year,
Or do we just pay 100% of the portion on the vehicles?
last year, Mat-Su came up with funding for 4 vehicles that they put into the system. And they also have funding for, I think, 8 vehicles this year through the state.
How much do we pay? How many vehicles do we have in this system?
We have about 65 vehicles, 56 of them operate in a van every day, and the rest are spares.
How many come from the valley every day?
53. 3 of them go from Anchorage to Girdwood.
Okay. On the 53, can you give me the cost that Anchorage pays for them to bring the people in from the valley?
Yes, and to clarify, all it is, it's just the match for the capital. There's
I know.
no
I understand that. I
Okay,
know we
okay.
don't do operating.
Okay.
The match for the capital, I'd just like to know how much in tax dollars we're talking about.
4,000 a vehicle times 53 vehicles.
Is that every year? Or is that when we buy them?
Vans last about how long?
We're keeping them for about 6 years now.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Ms. Johnson?
I feel
Debbie Oceander over my shoulder right now.
I'm getting there.
And Eagle River, and I understand that there might be a change as far as what she arranged last year with the anchor rides for that route. If we leave the Eagle River area except for one, what bus route is it?
102, which is, that's what we're down to in Eagle River. It's the 102 and the Anchor Rides Connect.
Could some of the private contractors, such as from the valley, could they, if they wanted to come into the area and supplement the services, could they?
We have encouraged them to do so, they have not.
And there, is it lack of subsidies or?
I think that might be part of it, but it's also lower demand.
Mr. Drummond.
Thank you. How much is collected now on the suggested donation program for anchor rides? Do you know?
About 50,000, so that's about, how much a trip? $1 a trip.
I would say 80 cents a trip.
It's about 50,000 overall, okay. Thank you.
I don't really have a question then, but there was a word in here that was sort of the games we play and moving the money, and I took offense to that a little bit because I don't know that there's games played, but it definitely illustrates the problem that we have. Your budget's bigger than last year. And
Yes.
we're, one way or another, we're reducing services, we're increasing fees, and your budget's still bigger than last year. That's, to me, the epitome of this budget problem we have, but it's the same as we had last year. And I don't think there's anybody here at our side that took a bigger hit than Debbie and myself last year, and it's still a problem with no solution. So, you talk about restoring money, I'll be there with you in the overall spirit of things, but remember, we have the longest commute times coming out of Chugiak, Eagle River, and those people stand out in the cold longer than the half an hour, 15-minute adjustment. So, I'm trying to be a team player here, but we got clobbered last year, and I'll be somewhat supportive of it, but don't forget about us, as Debbie would say if she was here. So, go ahead, Mr. Holmes.
I'm with you, Mr. Starr. I don't see, I'll be frank, I said it before, I said it again, I'll say it 1,000 times before this process is over. I don't see where the budget as proposed is acceptable, in my opinion. I think we pay a little more in making sure that our transit system is made whole. That increases ridership possibilities for your routes as well as our routes anywhere else. That's my perspective, that's my opinion, and of course, it's going to take a majority of the 11 of us to make sure that happens.
Yeah, and we, just from the administration side, we look forward to your amendments, and we'll consider every assembly member's amendments in the context of the budget, and we look forward to the cuts you'll make elsewhere to pay for the amendments that you put forward.
Thanks, sir.
Or increased revenue.
Or increased revenue.
Mr. Birch, go ahead.
Some discussion came up earlier about GPS on police vehicles, which I guess is happening. I think was it Barrow where they put a GPS unit and people could look out and they could see kind of when the bus was gonna show up?
Mr. Birch, bustracker.muni.org.
Okay.
Check it out.
Is that, okay, I'm just not dialed into that. So basically, is it time, or, does it show up, all the routes, and then you can track when it shows up at the?
You can even click on your bus stop, and it'll give you the scheduled arrival time of the routes that serve that stop, as well as the estimated arrival time.
There's probably an app for that too, Mr. Birch. I was going to say no.
Yeah, a whole app for that.
Mr. Drummond, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, last week's assembly meeting, Ms. Osiander did attempt to push the HUD application further out in order to get some of that money restored. And I said in my speech to decline to support that I would absolutely support restoring bus service to Eagle River. So I'm with you on that, Mr. Starr, and with Ms. Osiander. That was not an intent to keep Eagle River from getting transit service, but to make sure that those grants stayed on track for the people they were intended for. I'm absolutely in agreement that we don't have sufficient transit in this town, and it isn't fair to Eagle River not to have it. So I would support.
Well, with the creative solutions we have with the anchor rides and some of the other stuff that was kind of working and helped those folks there, and then got a little more senior change to the money they have to contribute. It's,
In fact, I think we've never really explored this, but I would be interested in looking at an increased fare past the Eagle River Bridge or something like that, a zone, so to speak, because that exists in many places. In the King County, for example, the closer you are to the city, the less it costs you to take the bus. When you begin to cross county lines or jurisdictional lines, the rate goes up.
Yeah.
But that, it only makes sense because that person has to
well,
travel.
I think we did modify the ridership passes on the annual, or the monthly pass. The Eagle River people did pay more and do now pay more for 102 routes. But I'm hearing it through, the employment centers, did we not do that? We were
No.
going to, but.
It's very difficult to do it by a certain
I
route.
remember your comments on that when we studied that in depth, and Debbie in particular spent many, many hours in this office trying to do it, and it's, it is all about Eagle River for me right now, but I did have a question about the van pool, but I'll take it offline with that. I look in, as we've made the pledge to talk about the capital stuff, there's again, it looks like and I'm real happy that the traffic comes off the Glen, because I commute, but when do we reach a point where, Matsu, you're gonna have to manage it on your own, to where it's not necessarily a profit center for us anymore, and the benefits are less and less, especially when we're providing a pretty good dispatch service, I think, and the coordination of the volunteer list. It's time for them to perhaps take it on themselves in the legislative plans. 4 buses out of 53 is not a really big contribution in their time and labor, and you're one person, so I would want you to study that, and that's page 230 of your big capital budget book. So that's all I had. Was there anybody else?
If you don't mind, Mr. Mack.
No.
This is the one budget where I get really frustrated with reductions, and I recognize everyone's trying to take their piece.
Louder,
but-
can't hear you.
So this is the one budget where I get particularly frustrated with reductions, and I know everyone's trying to accept their piece of it, but, I can't help but wonder how much more that person who has to watch 45 go by because there's no room is gonna cost us when they gotta file for unemployment because they can't get to work. And small business owner has to go through the cost of replacing that employee. I mean, it seems to me the ripple effects of these cuts are more significant than just about anything else we do, so. I know everyone's pledged to work on this. I know we all recognize how important this is to our community. And I look forward to the challenge.
Well, the budget's up, and so I'm looking either additional revenue sources, but I'm scouring at where we can move money in that thing that we do, and they're really, really tough choices, as they were last year too, with real people involved, and it's not just pontificating here, but it's very, very hard, and we've done forums, we've done meetings, we've done collective speak, and I know the pressure you're under every day. It may look at other things such as our operation efficiencies in our own shop, and I bring up outsourcing, and everybody sort of goes crazy that we're going to do something differently. Me, I've run transportation businesses before, and if a tire shop that we outsource can do it cheaper than our own shop, then we ought to do that, I think, because the core value is transportation services and not changing tires. They're related, absolutely, but, I would want you to pursue those dialogues just as much as that, and if we're contractually restricted, then that's another thing that's off the table that I can't change. If we pay too much for bus repairs, bus labors, whatever, then so be it. But if they're out there, let's please look at them.
I would like to point out that we do contract out, our Anchor Rides
Right.
program is all contracted out to a private vendor. And our van pool program is done by a private contractor as well.
Yeah. That's all we have. A few questions amongst with a lot of frustration, I think is what you heard, but thank you for being here.
Okay, the next department is Parks and Rec, and so we need to have John come up and join us.
I think so.
I'll get it, Chief.
Ready to go?
We are ready.
Mr. Rada.
I'm John Rodham, the Director of Parks.
Mr. Birch?
I'm John Rodham, the Director of Parks and Recreation. With me is Val Barkley from Eagle River and Liz Stanley from the Anchorage office, who are my key admin people. Very quickly, you can take a look at what our overall department budget is. There is a change that is significant. It also accepts $600,000 increase in debt service. So really, when you take a look at what the numbers are, we have managed all of the increases with reductions, both in the program side, and you'll see one additional change that would also occur pending final budget approval, and that's going to be a reduction on the Chidiac Eagle River piece, which is we're only collecting 0.3 on the capital side, so that number is going to go down ultimately. So you're actually going to see a shorter number on that side as well. The probably the biggest thing, how we've done it, and I should probably elaborate a little bit. In the last 2 years, Parks and Recreation has achieved a significant change downward in the overall budget. We have reduced by 40 positions, and yet we have reestablished a team framework that now supports a higher level of both expectation by the public, but delivery of service. A big part of that is we have converted positions. So while you see a little bit of a change, what you really do see is a net out gain. If you look across the board, where we have more bodies on the ground, particularly in the maintenance side. So while we have eliminated some positions, and as we get down into the savings, you'll see the admin position, supervisors, that it's aquatics, it's park ranger. We've got another position in the administration up front. Those are all going to go away, and then we've got additional savings. I know it's much to the concern of many people. We hear it loud and clear, but the fact of the matter is we have got to change some of our operating conditions based on some of our facilities. So what we've done is put that out publicly, caught a lot of flack. Jennifer and I have had conversations multiple times, but the bottom line is we can't afford to keep these facilities open on the fringe seasons. Particularly, there's a gentleman that testified at the assembly meeting last week. I think he spoke to the Jodhpur racing track. That's a good example. Very, very limited use in the fringe seasons, very limited. And yet that's, if you're going to fully staff, you're going to pay. So we've bitten the bullet. We've converted positions. We bumped up 85, 95% positions to 100%, moved them around. At the same time, then we've taken other positions, converted from part-time over into seasonal, actually increased our capacity, and so that's why you don't see much of a change, but you'll actually see a significant change on the ground. The bottom line is for maintenance, as an example, what we're in the process of doing is converting some of our higher level positions, and we're bringing in more seasonals, and basically we're going to actually enhance our next year's programming. And that's going to actually occur, we hope, with approval of an increase of net 10 to 12 more bodies on the ground, taking care of our facilities the way they should be. One piece I didn't address was the fees, which we've already had that discussion, minus the ASD fees, which I think has already been discussed last week. What do we do? As a team framework, that's probably the significant thing we've changed about our model. 6.5, almost 7 years I was in Eagle River. We established a core framework based on cross-jurisdiction support. We used a zone element, assigned our team leaders and our core functions so that they performed, they were accountable. We've done the same thing collaboratively within the department. Basically what we have is we have a team framework now that supports our mission and those services as identified across the board. You no longer have a section, if you will, operating on their own, not autonomously, but on their own without support. For example, you combine horticulture, community work service, and maintenance all together, and the bottom line is we're reducing our costs, increasing actually the manpower on the ground, and we're delivering more product. And if you take a look at the areas around the municipality, I heard in the transition, that was a huge dilemma based on the conditions that people saw our parks in. We have heard not great things. It was our first year, first summer of doing it, but I think we've seen dramatic improvement in the overall conditions on the street.
Ms. Johnson has a comment or a question, I think, right now.
Actually, as far as the pools and some of your other seasonal, but more particularly the pools, are there any additional costs by shutting them down for the summer and then, starting that, or maintenance costs with, it's a wash?
It is, because we're not actually draining the pool, we're just turning down the lights, turning down the heat. So it actually would be a savings, but your biggest savings will be in your personnel.
Yeah.
Because we'll move them from the service pool, we're at minimal operation, to the lakes where we have high.
Just moving bodies to where they should be.
And then my other question, as far as your reduction in grants, what for the Mountain View and the Northeast Community Center?
I think we finally arrived at approximately 40,000, I think was the number, Cheryl.
And do you know what that means?
Excuse me.
As far as what it means to them, to the community centers?
They're just absorbing some of the pain that we are.
So is it after, you don't know if it's after-school programs or?
No, we don't identify their programming needs at Northeast.
Thank you.
Mr. Honeman, relevant now, or you want to?
I don't know if he's finished, I'll wait.
He's not done yet. Mr. Trainee, relevant now?
Relevant now, on the pools,
Yes.
we're gonna shut service down in the summertime. Is that gonna violate the bonding that we got to repair the pools from the state at all? So that wasn't a requirement that we keep them open?
No.
I just wanna check before I get legislators calling me, wanting to know why it's shut down.
Is this in your district?
Yes, it is. And believe me, I'll get the calls. I'll give him your number, John.
I'm sorry?
I'll give him your number.
Go ahead.
Most
people have it.
Did I have a dream about this Peoples for Pools thing, that the use actually never measured up to what the forecast was? Or when did we have that conversation?
We had that conversation about a year and a half ago. Actually, it was Assemblymember Clayman that brought it forward and wanted to have a 6-month trial period where we examined the participation as expressed by the public. It never materialized.
The expanded use and the contributions of the user
That
groups
is
to your
correct.
model?
Bill, just keep that fridge ready for Tuesday.
No, I was there for that, and it was a very well orchestrated, lots of pins and badges and a lot of passion that said, this is what our core value is. And is that true across the board or just in selected regions? What's happening in Chugiak, for example?
More so we've seen in the service area. There was a huge hue and cry. I know the mayor's office was bombarded. I was bombarded with emails. There was a lot of emphasis put forth by the training groups. The supposition was that they were going to come out en masse, they were going to help disseminate the information, and there was going to be gross participation increase. And the bottom line is it didn't happen.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a little bit more. You had the discussion a year and a half ago, which you weren't part of, but I think active in it, was the solution as it related to the Bartlett Pool and the Olympic size and the statewide events that are consciously pushing into that. Is that fixed a little bit more with their contribution financially to help us? I see your fees and fines is heading that way with a little increase in markups there. Does it need to be more for those out-of-state users to tie that facility up for 4 days and you have to come in and clean it up?
We don't see a huge amount of out-of-state, just more.
Well, or in-state, out of the city, I guess.
We recognize that, but we're working with the organizations. One of the things you can't overburden them because it's going to shunt, I should say, possible participation. What we're trying to do is work with the nonprofit side of the state directors and encourage them to grow so that it actually builds the program to back up. You can't, it's kind of a fine line.
And then the Golden Nugget Triathlon is still out of there, or did they move there to the military base?
They're back.
They're back. Do we get money from that?
Yes.
That's all I have, Ms. Drummond. Mr. Birch.
I just had a question on the, having gone through that People for Pools discussion and a lot of the neighborhood activity, and it was, even though the pool might be in Mr. Trainee's district, a lot of the users are in Jennifer and mine. Yeah, what's the potential for contracting, or, you know, in other words, can you lease a municipal asset like that out? I mean, if there's a private organization that came up and said, hey, we'd like to operate the pool through the summer, if the municipality's not interested in opening it, can you prescribe a contractual, you know, insurance and bonding and whatever they need to do and say, yeah, here's, you can use this with these guidelines if you would like to staff it, operate it, maintain it, keep it up?
And we've offered.
You've offered, okay, well, I think that's certainly a fair alternative and a reasonable approach for somebody that feels like they've got the level of use that really would support and sustain.
I've offered more than once.
Okay, good, thank you.
I didn't know, Mr. Honeman, more?
I think that was part of my question, and I guess the bottom line is that recognizing, looking at the bottom levels of the taxpayer subsidy participant hour, it appears that all the pools, and likely it's difference in participants, like Bartlett looks like it's one of the highest per participant cost. But it strikes me that we're building or have built these facilities, managed and owned, operated by the municipality. I think at one point, some of the pools actually belonged to the schools. I think there was some negotiated.
No, they never belonged to them, excuse me, they managed.
Managed them or whatever, as it works on, but the money and the
There's a
shifting and
difference.
that's okay. But it occurs to me, it's kind of like a trail, it's like the parks. We have these facilities, we have this infrastructure, and we're gonna shut them down for a certain period of time. And my question is that absent the overhead cost of salaries of people managing and or monitoring programs that go on inside, the cost of the building and the cost of the heat of the building and the cost of the heat of the water, so it doesn't have more mechanical problems than we're really envisioning. What's the savings on that, or are there any? If I don't have a user group and a pool and I shut it down for the summer, are there any savings other than salary staff?
It's gonna be nominal in the big scheme of things. Utilities have gone up $175,000 in 3 years.
So we really are not seeing a savings on shuttering a pool other than the cost of labor to keep operation and perhaps the users in.
Well, we're just shifting, because if we keep the pools open, we have staffing requirements there. In the summer, we've got to have additional staff then at the lakes and other facilities. If we're not getting any revenue here, let's save as much as we possibly can, not burden ourselves here, just move them over and assign them to a new task.
And then
It's a way to balance what we're trying to do.
So my question to that is if that is the case, would you perhaps benefit from a stronger marketing campaign on the municipalities level? I mean, I know the People Mover was just ahead of you, and they have a marketing campaign that went up, their marketing section went up a little bit in years as a period.
You know, we put out information on the pools, just like we do with every facility. It is out there. And if people participate and join a cross-country ski program, or they go do some other, it could be anything. The same information is out across the board. And the key is the people for pools who told us emphatically they would carry the message out. They would deliver it, as well as those people with the triathlon groups and the other special interests. Literally promised that they would see results, okay, in the coffers on behalf of their use, and it hasn't happened.
Okay, and then my question to that is that do you know why? For instance, was there a conduit, a breakdown, have you done any prodding on the municipality side to ask, where are you guys at? You said you'd be, I guess that's my question. Or when you build it, will you come?
Because we do get pinged a lot about it, and I think a number of things have happened, Mr. Hahnemann. One is you have private pools that have been built on the south side of town. You have, you notice as far as the pool usage, you have the Weston Diamond pools that have the best usage. They also have the most club activity. So as Mr. Rada was saying, as far as activity, you have your Nordic ski clubs that, you know, bring in the people. Or the clubs, swimming clubs are the same thing. And we don't have that strong, and it could have been because there was a drop in service because a roof was caving in service, so they found other places. And once they found other places to go, they stayed there.
And that was my next kind of proposal or pitch.
I'm gonna just sort of intercede here in the absence of being able to get to police and fire with an educated discussion. Mr. Rada, I know you have more slides to put out for us, and I was asking for a consolidated summary at this point on, you know, the slide that talks about the reimbursement to ASD and all of that may be a different type of discussion to have outside of this body.
And we can, but it was a question that was raised last week, and so we added that slide because it was significant to the discussion as to what ASD pays for.
Yeah, again, I don't know, aside from another assembly action, that we can actually even do anything about that.
Understand.
In the ASD's reimbursement side of their budget. If we send them a bill and they don't pay it, then we got issues. But if you could summarize, because I do want to give police and fire time to go too, so.
I guess I would summarize our department's view basically is that we've dropped well over $2 million in the operating budget, 40 positions. We have retooled dramatically, and yet I think the results are pretty apparent. Internally they are. There's better communication, cooperation, there's more energy, there's better results, okay, for less money.
Yeah, and I would echo, one of the heat I took in my community was, are we letting John go? As our parks director out there, everyone said, don't let him go, he's too good for us, and I'm really impressed with the transition. Our parks network out there with the self-funding that we incur has not seen a reduction. I have 0 complaints to log in this year. I used to get more, quite frankly, when you were working out there every day, so maybe I get it, but, and I'm always astounded, no offense to how old you are, I look about 60, but you actually are over that. Are you gonna hang in here for a little while, or what's the transition gonna be, John?
Yeah.
Well, it is, John, tell people how old you are.
I'm older than the mayor.
Okay, well, I want to know that we've got leadership for another year, and
Going
I
in.
put it on the record because I want to know that you're going to be here for another year.
Well, I'm well over 60.
Yeah, you are. Go ahead.
If I could have a money question instead of
Money
an age
question.
question.
Sure.
Mr. Rada, thank you very much.
That was a money question.
I'm impressed with the work that you've done to stay within your available revenues. On the accountability page with the tax subsidy per participant hour, those last 3 lines for Service Bartlett and Chubiak, is that where the pool debt service increase is showing up? The slide is on the
No.
No,
last
that's
3 lines.
separate. That's separate.
Or did those pools just cost more? Do they just cost more to maintain because of their age?
Well, Bartlett Pool with the size, utilities are huge for Bartlett Pool, about 20,000, and then Service Pool is just low attendance.
So that the number of users is way down, so the cost per user is up.
Yeah, and if you take a look at the note at the bottom,
Yeah.
although that's a typo, there's Service in Chubiak and Bartlett were all closed.
For 3 months last year.
So, I
Didn't
mean,
get the revenue.
a
Mr. Trainee?
change, I can't tell you how big that change might have been.
John, I got an email last week from a guy that lives on Jupiter, complaining about the ball fields next to him. Apparently, he's under the assumption that the Little League would always clean up the ball fields, and I guess there are 8 bags for McDonald's, because I counted them. I went there after I got his email. 8 bags on the ground there, and there's a couple of fertilizer bags. Can you get with the Little League or whoever?
Which
And
fields?
get it cleaned up before winter hits?
Which fields?
It's the Simone Little Leagues in them, the bicentennial park ones we
Well, our
did.
favorite,
Huh?
yours are my favorite ones.
Yes, it is my favorite one. I cut down 13 trees if I remember correctly by the verbiage.
Mr. Hall?
13 acres of them.
You didn't pick up 8 McDonald's bags?
I picked them up, but there's still more there.
All right, we'll check it.
If
Mr.
you
Hall,
would,
go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Starr. I think I'd be very derelict if I didn't compliment Mr. Rada. I sit on the Anchorage Park Foundation Board, and I got to tell you, we've developed an incredible relationship with the Parks Department. And we're able to take, this year we took $435,000 and managed to, with in-kind and volunteers, do about $2 million worth of work for that in parks all across the community. The Parks Department has been absolutely fantastic in working together and helping provide the services that we need. So, thank you, appreciate that.
Nice to hear the compliments too. Mr. Flynn, go ahead.
Just real quick. I think I heard the answer obliquely, but because of their shifting in staffing, we're basically maintaining staffing levels at the recreation centers, Fairview and Spenard.
We're moving similar to what we did a year ago. We took a look at the operating hours as they existed, and we just optimized the staffing and the hours to match the use. So we're moving them around.
We're staying consistent.
We are doing that.
Last year.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
On your CIB, what's the South Anchorage Sports Complex?
That is a project that I've had discussions with the mayor about the facilities that may be going in that area.
But you know where the American Legion fields are? Kind of similar right now in its size and scope to what Cutting Midtown Park was, very underdeveloped in terms of infrastructure. There's no water to the site, so there'll be some site development preparation with getting utilities in. And ultimately, we want that complex to be both a facility so that there's both concessions, warm-up bathrooms, and possibly court additions in the future, and then dog park development, skateboard park development. So just that whole complex is extremely underdeveloped, and this would be phase one of getting.
And that's the American Legion.
Yeah, there's 2 American Legion fields and 1 Little League field there now, and the game plan calls for more Little League fields and again, a more permanent facility for users.
That's a good idea.
Well, it's a dog park now, but it's
It used to be the soccer fields. But with all the changes within the municipality, the soccer fields are now no longer used. So our vision is to have an enclosed dog park. It's a very large space which would accommodate a lot of use.
That's all we have apparently, Mr. Rada. Thank you. Appreciate your preparation.
It's actually
yeah, it's right next door to the Syrian office. Are you?
Okay, let's talk about the police department funding.
Hi, I'm Mark Mew with the Anchorage Police Department. Steve and Debbie, do you want to join me just in case? I'm going to have a couple of my people come up and sit just in case I get in over my head. Steve Smith, Deputy Chief, and Debbie McCravey, who is our budget. Okay. This is a fairly self-explanatory slide. We anticipate some savings through reducing our fleet. You're going to see later, we're going to talk a little bit about personnel, and so there's going to be fleet vehicles savings possible as a result of that. We're doing a lot better in 2009 and again in 2010, managing our overtime and our non-labor costs as well. We expect next year $29,000 savings in non-labor. We have the same savings you heard about earlier in phone system through new technology. And we don't control this, but there's savings in police and fire medical trust as well.
Increase is a typo.
No, it is an increase. Just a dash is part of the format. So it's a 961,000 increase, contribution.
The big thing you're going to see next year is position reductions of, that says 23 full-time equivalents. My count is 22. I'm not sure why we're off on that, but the size of our department, one position isn't. I'm not sure Cheryl how.
Well, it's because in your continuation level, you reduced control office. You deleted to make room for your police captain, we deleted a position, and our point of comparison is 2010 revised.
Right, okay.
So that's why.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So, how we get there with the positions is, this is a snapshot in time. Actually, it's changed quite a bit since the budget was set, and so I'm going to explain the difference between what you see on the slide where we are today. But this involves, by the first of the year, reducing the department by 10 unfilled positions and reducing the department further by 12 filled positions. Now those were the ones that were filled when we went through the original exercise. So as more people have left through natural attrition, that bottom number 12 is getting smaller and smaller, and the upper number 10 is getting bigger and bigger, but they add up to the same number in the end. The total savings remains the same between those two. Right now, we are down to only having to lose 3 more positions between now and January 1 before we could tell you that no actual layoffs have to occur. And we have reason to believe that we're going to get there. So where before we talked about hard body layoffs, I think we're in a position where we can say that we most likely will not have hard body layoffs, although we will have 22 fewer positions on January 1 than we have today. Part of the way we got there is we have grant funding for 4 positions that came in just about the time we met to roll out the budget here about a month ago. So that funds 4 the positions. It means there are 4 fewer we have to eliminate. Remaining positions, which I say not 8 now, they're actually down to 3, are natural attrition of people going out the door for one reason or another. We anticipate more people going. We also are quite hopeful about another grant coming in that will affect that as well. Next slide. So we anticipate that we're able to keep, our first priority is patrol. While this budget involves us losing overall numbers, we don't want to impact patrol. Patrol is where our core mission occurs. If we're down to one last police officer, that would be a patrol officer on the street responding to a call. So you heard from PERF earlier today, and they based their numbers on a July study. Their numbers were fixed in July. We really fixed our numbers in August. There's a couple numbers probably off there. But the staffing that we had in August when we made our budget, any further reductions from there, what I'm telling you is after these reductions are done, there won't be any difference in patrol than what you were comfortable with, what we had in place in August of this year. We'll tell you a little bit later in this slide production how we're going to beef up patrol and where we're going to take the reductions elsewhere in the department. We are going to try and implement some of the PERF report that you heard about today. One of those ways we're going to do that is to start the patrol focus and patrol, the 2 districts, north and south, create beat managers and beat owners, and adjust the span of control between sergeants and officers so that we begin that neighborhood focus. So we hope in this budget, and as we work operationally under this budget, that the people in the neighborhoods are going to be seeing the same officers more often than they are today and get more kind of local tailored service than they are today. When we fix, and we're going to talk about fixing the span of control here in a minute in patrol, but that should involve citizens' complaints being handled a little more quickly and probably more consistently because we're going to have a squad type arrangement where the same supervisors with the same patrol officers with the same day off sets all the time. Less falling through the cracks or waiting for some rotation of sergeants days off before complaints can be worked. We will restore the supervisor's position to the community action policing team, so that will help first of all, it gets the unit back to where it was before Sergeant Allen retired in terms of the number of people on it, but we've been doing acting sergeant kind of arrangement since then, and that will fix that, so their prioritization will be more consistent and they'll be better directed. They're doing a good job right now, but we need to get back where we were. You will see slightly less service in terms of directed traffic enforcement. By that I mean we have a citizens call-in number right now. If you have a problem in your neighborhood, there's speeders in your neighborhood or whatever, you can call the traffic hotline. We'll put you on the list. We send some dedicated traffic people out there. Traffic does a lot of that kind of work. It's a fairly robust unit right now. We are going to use traffic to help offset the vacancies of patrol, so we'll be reducing that unit a little bit. So if you use that service, it might be longer before you saw a traffic officer, or you might not get him for as long, him or her, for as long a detail as you might otherwise.
Mr. Trainee has a question on that point, and if we can just kind of continue to hold questions until we get to the end, that's good.
Chief, just a quick question. On Tudor Road this year, Lake Otis, they were working on it. There was a cop car on each side of where they were working on, required by state law, I think it's a state project. How much do we charge the state for that officer being there the whole time they're doing construction?
This year, and this goes back to our raising the fees.
I want to make sure it's in the
Yeah.
fees.
But this year, if it was a non-overtime detail, a non-double time detail, it would have been $110 an hour.
Okay, how about next year?
Well,
With the
those
fee
numbers are
increase.
moving around, right, Cheryl?
Yeah,
I just want to make sure it's fully loaded.
Yes, Mr.
That is a fully loaded number.
And for FY11, we're going to have an amendment to our fees and fines bill that increases the $110 to $132, which is the average cost of an officer.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It's all filled out. Okay, so anyway, that's the impact on the traffic unit. We also are going to staff the E911 center, our communication center, the center manager position. We'll talk about that in more detail here. Right now, there's not a person in that position. We don't want to lose ground in that room, so we want to maintain the systems we have in there and improve customer service. I think you heard a little bit earlier today about how call takers would provide customer service to a caller in terms of asking them if they wanted to wait if it's busy or have a phone-in report, or whether wait a little bit longer and see their beat officer, depending on call stack. You know, we anticipate those kinds of services we might be able to improve upon. Okay, so one of the recommendations in the PERF report, these are not all the recommendations, these are the ones that we are we plan to implement right now that impact the budget. We would promote sergeants in patrol and on cap. So right now, we need to promote 3 more sergeants in patrol and 1 more sergeant for the cap team. What this does is it creates the proper span of control, for purposes of supervision, how many officers report to a sergeant, and it gives us enough sergeants and officers that we can put the sergeants who work with the same, say 7 to 10 officers have the same days off. So instead of me coming in and I work for you for my first 2 nights, and then I work for you my last 2 nights, and then sometimes you don't know what I did wrong on the night that you were here, and you know, we get things happen like that. We correct that. The sergeant and his or her officers are all work together as a team. So that fixes the span of control and helps get more consistency in terms of delivering supervision and handling complaints and input from the public. Makes us more responsive in that regard. It also gives us enough teams that we can start deploying them by beats. So you'll have beat officers and officers who work the same beats each time and own those beats. And you'll have a single sergeant that's responsible for 1 or 2 beats, and they don't worry about the other beats. So you get beat-specific geographic focus in terms of your supervision. The communication center manager, I think history has shown us it's going to take us a long time to find somebody with the skills to do that job. It was filled mostly by a subcontractor over the last 6 or 7 years that helped us build the 911 system. We had a lot of professional knowledge, and we capitalized on that, and we supplemented it with sergeants that we would rotate to that unit. But we're short on sergeants now. As you see, we're promoting them just to keep the streak going, and we need a professional technical person in there. In the meantime, we have an open lieutenant position. We have a lieutenant out on layoff right now. We proposed that position remains in the budget next year. We propose bringing that lieutenant back and using that person to help keep an eye on dispatch. It may not be that individual person, may move him and put a different lieutenant in, but try and get some management level oversight, keep it in that room so that we don't backslide there. So how do we keep the patrol force on at the same level as August and at the same time promote sergeants and create these beat managers and fix the span of control? The way we plan on doing it is reducing traffic by 2 officers and sending them to patrol reducing detectives by 8 and sending them to patrol, there's a seniority shakedown that occurs when this happens. And so in that fashion, we end up with the same number of people in patrol as we had in August, with a better span of control. However, we take some reduction in service in traffic and detectives. We pick traffic and detectives because in the staffing study, PERF identified places where we are a little bit thinner, some places where we're staffed a little more generously, and detectives and traffic were generously staffed. In the case of detectives, the report gives us an option to increase some detective services. You heard about that today. Or if we did not want to increase the services detectives would provide the public, then alternatively think about redeploying them to patrol. So in a reduction mode, we thought that was the advice we should take, and detectives is where we go to fund that. As I say, this creates a patrol squad concept and creates beat managers.
Mr. Trainee has a point there.
On the detectives, which type of detective specific areas we have?
Well, we would discuss that further. I don't know if we made our fast decisions yet, but I think we would look at the last place I would feel like we want to go would be sexual assault.
Okay, so that's the last place you're gonna go?
That's the last place I'd like to go. And we start looking at property crimes in areas like that first.
Thank you.
I have a question as it relates to the more rural models area. Both you and Mr. Assistant Chief Smith live out in Chugach Eagle River with the neighborhood policing and sort of that emphasis. How do you see applicability to that policy working in the more rural areas there in the upper hillside in terms of regular coverage? What do you think there? We're already down to just 3 officers now that have that all the way to the bridge.
We've always had 3 officers
Yeah.
there. I mean, that's the number we've typically had since I started the department. In fact, I think that number was basically set it as a concept when we went to rural unification. This wouldn't affect that in terms of the number. There still would be 3. I think most of the time you're probably seeing the same folks like to work Eagle River right now, and there's probably some consistency there already. We would keep consistency there. The consistency might be more firm. You might have basically a commitment. You're the Eagle River officer for the next year unless you mess up or something, or get promoted out of the unit, or go to SWAT or some other thing. What I think you would see differently is a supervisor who is assigned to those officers consistently all the time. So if you're asking for a level of service from your patrol officers out there and they don't feel they have the authority to grant it, you'll be talking to their boss. That boss is responsible for your area of town and making decisions that will impact the quality of service you provide in that town. It's not a boss that'll be working Spenard the next day. So it has a vested interest and will be rated performance-wise on how well he responds to the needs of the local community. So that's going to trickle down to what the officers do, but when you want to raise it up a notch, you'll have more consistent supervision.
You anticipate, I know you haven't made the changes yet, but the detectives, there's 2 now out there. Do you anticipate that changing in terms of the day-to-day squad we have out there?
I don't think we've drilled down to that level this yet. There'll be some adjustment, but I don't think so. And in the PERF report, another thing that we can implement that isn't really a cost item, but they don't recommend changing the focus of the different detective units we have. We still have a theft unit, still have a burglary unit, still have a robbery unit, but what they do talk about is within that unit, certain of the theft detectives, you 2 are going to work these beats, you 2 are going to work these other beats, you 2 are going to work these other beats. You already have that in Eagle River.
Right.
Your theft detectives in Eagle River work Eagle River. So the other areas of town are going to start seeing that sort of responsiveness. So
Thank you.
I don't think there'll be anything reduction that Eagle River will notice.
In more of a global look, and this is sort of as it relates to the CBA, the bargaining agreement statements in there has a certain ratio of number of dispatched officers to requirement to have supervisory staff show up. And I think it's whenever you have 6 officers in one area per se, you have to have by your CBA a requirement that a sergeant or a supervisory role. Are you going to be in conflict with any of that in your reportioning of your officers and how that is? And
I don't see that changing.
In that, what is the number?
I think that language, Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that language is specific towards overtime details. So if we send a crew out on an overtime detail, that they aren't reporting to the shift lieutenant and the shift sergeants and all that stuff we have in place. They're out there working some detail on their own. if you have a certain number of them, the contract says we put a sergeant out there to watch them, make sure it works. But I don't believe the contract language sets up a fixed ratio within the department for regular operations.
I maybe misread it. I thought it was anytime there was 7 dispatched, you had to have that by your TBA.
No, I think this is just, that's.
Okay, well, I'll go back and revisit that as an opportunity to perhaps come back to the table and talk. So, do you have more to do, Chief?
Next slide. Okay, these are some of the we have about 12 pages or 15 pages of performance measures and so forth. This is a few of them. Department-wide, one of our measures is the sexual assault rate. We want to, you can see that that's a high priority for us. The patrol measure there involves the patrol response time for priority 1 calls for service. And by that we mean from the dispatch time, the call hold time, the dispatch time, the response time of the officer. So it's from the time the 911 call rings to the time the officer's 10-7, or I'm sorry, on location. We want to keep that under 8 minutes. You can see what our numbers have been in that regard. In detectives, it's a homicide clearance rate is the one we're reporting on right now. That's a tricky one because homicides are long-term investigations. We might be, right now, we have cases that we would close that would affect the numbers we report for 2009 or 2008. So it may be sometimes years, those numbers are going to continue to change, even though they're years that have gone off. They look like old years, but next year that 82% for 09 might be 85 or something else if we close a case that we're working from last year. This is a slide on our capital budget. We don't have much in the capital budget in terms of bonds right now. There's the $250,000 has to do with the air conditioner upgrade for the dispatch center, so the equipment in there that doesn't overheat and fry on us. It's the same equipment that's been in the building for 20-some years. There's another $2 million in about 2 years down the road, proposed bond that would finish the outdoor secure storage lot, so we would move away from the Tudor Road facility across the street, where we can't keep a good eye on that property, and bring it over to the east side of our building. There are some state capital requests that are out there. They include further building expansions if that ever comes to pass, although I'm not all that optimistic about that. And also a range up by an outdoor shooting range, so that we aren't going to military bases and other facilities for some of the work that we do that doesn't work out real well on a public range.
I'll keep supporting that. I had a question as it related to your attrition, and that it looks like this year with the decisions to reclassify detectives to people in the street, as you said, or some reference to that. Are we equipped going into the following year, or are we going to see a degradation of that and the new solution required next year? Specifically, there is no academy specified in the budget. Are we going to be okay this coming season and as into 2011?
I think that this exercise will bring us to around the 360 sworn position by January 1. Further, we would anticipate further natural attrition occurring during 2011. We're going to start dropping below that number. We were able to come in the black this year in our labor line unless something goes really awry in the next 6 weeks. We're going to come in $1.5 to $2 million in the black. My understanding is that money may be available next year to fund an academy. We don't know how big yet, or when in the year, whether it's a full-blown academy or whether we're able to recruit people already that have certification that maybe we can run them through a faster academy. We've done a bit of that in the past. But I think that it appears we're going to be able to talk about a 2011 academy and fund it out of that money. Our department worked very hard this year to try and keep overtime down and come in under the wire, and I'm happy that we may be able to use that money next year.
Appreciate the answer. Thank you. Ms. Gray-Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 questions. And the first one is, what's the phone number for the traffic hotline? Okay
I don't
then.
know.
All right.
I can get it,
Thanks. My constituent. Okay, and the second question is, what's the term of the grant?
What's,
The term of the grant, cost
the,
grant.
the four position grant?
Yeah, yeah.
It funds, 4 positions for 3 years.
Okay, and my next question is, are there any significant requirements in the grant agreement?
No, this
No.
one is, this was, stimulus money. It was just designed to prevent the department's government from having to lose too many bodies, in this case, police, and it keeps 3 people going that otherwise would get laid off.
Okay, so there are no significant requirements in the grant agreement?
The only thing that I can tell you is it funds the entry-level amount of the position. Well, our most junior people are no longer at the entry level. They've bumped up a couple steps, so there is a bit that we would have to cover for each of those positions. But they don't have to do anything special or do anything different than what they're doing today.
And when the grant expires, then what?
Then we start funding them again.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank
Mr.
you.
Horniman, go ahead.
Yes.
And we'll go about 3 or 4 more minutes, and then we need to give some
No.
time to the fire department.
Just a quick question. Fully loaded, and I heard the term is fully loaded for, and I'm assuming it's time and a half. I'm assuming $110 an hour equates to time and a half.
That was set several years ago, and I don't know, we could not find the basis for that
Okay.
calculation.
But you're right. I think that's time and a half.
Time and a half,
And then
because-
the second figure is double time.
Oh, okay. And the reason I say that is because I looked into the contract while we're sitting here, and it looks like the most expensive senior patrol officer at straight time is $37.84 an hour, and then if you do the halftime, it's another $18.92, for a total of $56.76, leaving at $110, $53.24. Now, my question is can we break that down into, I'm sure you can, fringe benefits, police vehicle, gas costs like that for duration? Be nice to have so we can use that. And the other part to that question is, with the savings, as you say, and with potentially policy decisions that the Assembly has to make, wouldn't it seem, perhaps with the amount of discussion that we have, the dialogue, people's misunderstanding of the charges that are made to an entity, perhaps a church, cotillion, or the Aces of Sullivan Arena game, where you're paying for charging an entity the $110 or soon to be possibly $132. There's all this concern over and misunderstanding truly on the monies. Wouldn't it be better, more efficient, immensely less costly to the entities if we had enough staff at APD to put a regular straight time officer, not on overtime, for those 3, 4, 5 hours, whatever it may be, thereby costing less to the citizen and costing less to the entity if it were per person.
Ms. Cray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one really quick question to Ms. Frasca. It looks like every single department is gonna have some savings because of technology upgrades. Could you just give me an idea of what kind of technology upgrades?
Well, in the instance where we've been talking about the telephone,
Right?
yeah, that relates to the telephone. It was technology upgrades associated with the telephone system. And so
Right.
you want details about what the
I saw the
system
telephone,
upgrades.
yeah,
Right.
that is a telephone system, but I'd like to kind of know how we're gonna save money there.
Okay, we'll get that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just had a technical question on 20-2, a money question, if you will. In the 2009 accounting principles, Ms. Frasca, even though you weren't doing them in 2009, but is there a difference in the accounting between 2009, which was $58 million for total direct cost, now to $91 million for this year? Did it really escalate, or did we do different expensing? I know that's a tough question to answer, but it seems like
Seems like a lot of money, huh?
well, I mean, it wasn't a leading question. It was, are we accounting differently for that, or is it the same number of personnel?
It's should be the same direct cost calculation. We can go back and look at 2009 if something was not included, but it would appear that the costs have increased.
From 58 million to 91 million in a year and a half?
Yeah.
Okay. It just struck me as a lot, and I know it's gone up, but that number really seems to be a lot. Mr. Birch?
To Mr. Hahnemann's point on the potential for just putting a straight-time staff member on the police department to handle some of the private concerns, Is there a prohibition on, say, the Sullivan Arena, hiring a private contractor to provide, flagging services and traffic control, or Mr. Prevost church, if he wants to, is there a prohibition on them hiring somebody privately, or are they compelled to use Anchorage Police Department?
I'm gonna have to answer this in two ways, because the Sullivan is a little bit different beast. Let's take everybody but the Sullivan. There is no prohibition for an entity to hire flag people or someone like Warning Lights or Shaman or somebody like that to put up cones and develop traffic plans and so forth to help with that. And in fact, many of them do. And the Sullivan does, although I said set the Sullivan aside for them. The only thing that is different is there are some things under statute that only sworn officers can do that you might want to have done in your traffic detail. So if you want that, then you're going to have a sworn officer to do those functions. For instance, if you set up some cones and well, how should I say this? What you can do, what a flagger can do, this sounds strange, but they can make you stop and they can make you go, but they can't tell you to go someplace else if you don't want to go there. So that takes a sworn officer. Why? I don't know, but that's in statute. The other thing they can't do is if you violate that, they can't chase you down and write you a ticket to enforce the fact that everybody's got to do that. So the enforcement piece, you need somebody there that can do that. But a lot of them do use some combination of us and a private contractor because it's cheaper for the flag portion and the cone portion to have somebody else doing it. That is the case at the Sullivan, that some of it is done by private contractors that do the cones and that, and then we do the rest of it. And there's probably an opportunity to maximize some of that and minimize some of what we do. But now we get into the collective bargaining agreement, and there are provisions in there that say once something is done by represented people, that then contracting out to non-represented people and taking work away, that could be an issue. I don't know how the association would go with that. It's something we want to think about before we got out of it completely, because we might have a battle on our hands over that, or not. But we need to have some discussions and work through it.
And I'll just encourage discussions between now and December 7th directly with department heads too. So.
But I would also say that in terms of the Sullivan, another thing that's different about it is the contract with the company that operates the Sullivan for us, has certain expectations written into that contract. So the time to change those expectations would be now, when we're rebidding, looking at the contract with these new bids going on. So.
Thanks, Chief. We're going to move to a different department now. So thank you for being prepared. Okay. Cheryl, my thing, this is the last one.
Yes. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a few more minutes.
I think it's appropriate. If you have conversations, can you take them outside? Chief, you? What are you gonna do? I don't know what I'll do to him, but I would just, just using my authority here, but Chief Hall, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Mark Hall, Fire Chief of the City of Anchorage. I'd like to introduce two people because they're fairly new to the positions that they're in. Deputy Chief of Operations, Chris Bashew, been with the department over 30 years. Been in this position a couple of months. And John Drozdowski Jr., he's the Deputy Chief of Administration, been with the job about 21 years. He and I got hired together, and he's been in the job just a few weeks himself. So we're actually all pulling in the same direction, and this is going to be an education for them and me. Yes, it is. Nope, he took it. He took this. Yeah, two. Go ahead. So the department cost, as you can see, was when you take out the police fire retirement, it's approximately $66.5 million. The police fire retirement trust, I really don't have anything that I can do about that. It's just a statement of fact, and that's the way it is. 2010, we had approximately 376 full-time, and we have two what we call part-time positions. They're basically just half-funded positions that are not filled at this point in time due to, we're trying to save money with budget savings. In the future, I'd like to fill those, but at this point in time, we're using them as budget savings. We're going to continue that in 2011. Our proposal, and we'll get to it in a few minutes, are to take truck 11, which is Eagle River, out of service, and engine 10, which is Bear Valley, and that will be a reduction in 22 personnel. Today, at this point in time, I have approximately 19 vacant positions. So that leaves me 3 that I need to try to get by the end of the year. If I get those 3 by the end of the year, nobody will walk out the door. When we shut down those 2 pieces of apparatus, we'll be able to use those people to help us with our contract mandated staffing. The next slide, I guess. We have some performance values that we're trying to accomplish also. And the first unit, we'd like it to arrive within 4 minutes to all emergencies 90% of the time. That is something that we're trying to do. And as you can see, 2008, 9, 10, luckily for us, we are improving. The other goal to fight fire, you want to have the NFPA standard would like you to have 15 firefighters within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. And our numbers are a little bit low there, but we are working on improving those also. Next one. The change in service that we propose to the administration, given the budget circumstances that we have, would be Truck 11, which is the truck company out in Eagle River. The difference between a fire truck and a fire engine, the fire engine carries hose and water. The fire truck is the forcible entry equipment, the generator, the lights, the power. You might see them with a big ladder on top of them, and that's for rooftop operations. We base this on the number of calls, and we have a visual that's actually a little bit better than just reading. And that shows you right there the call volume that Truck 11 went on in 2009 and to date. We use this information to make our decision. And if you'll go back one slide, Cheryl, please. When we do take out Truck 11, we have an engine, an ambulance, and a tender. A tender is a water with 1 person on board. An ambulance has 2 people on board. And the engine, we will probably have 4 on board there. Thank you. Next. This shows the response area for Eagle River. The green is what we can get to in 4 minutes. The mauve or the purple or whatever color Jake called that gets us there in 8 minutes. Or 8 minutes. Next slide. The next piece of apparatus we chose to do would be engine 10, and that is the Bear Valley Station. Right now we have an engine company up there and a tender that carries 1 person. As you can see, we use this information to make that decision based on the budget constraints that we have. This was what we could defend. Rabbit Creek, it does have the lowest number of responses. And our backups to it, the tender will remain there. We are talking with my administration now how we're going to make sure that it's not only the tender. We'll either bring up another tender so that 2 people are there together so that nobody's alone. That's a work in progress, I'll be honest with you. That's something we're trying to deal with and what we're going to do. The backup to those stations is Huffman, down at Station 9, the Huffman area. They are the backup to Engine 10, and O'Malley Station on 8, at Station 8 on O'Malley Road. They are the backup, and they also have an engine company there and a tender, what we call rolling water. And again, there we go. This is Station 10, which is Bear Valley. You can see the 4-minute response time that we can get to. Station 8 is, Engine 10 is Bear Valley. Station 8 is O'Malley Road. Station 9 is Huffman. I am hurrying, you don't have to push me so fast. So that's how our response is. So if you can imagine an engine company being gone from there, Engine 9 and Engine 8 will be the backup to Engine 10's area. Thank you, Cheryl. This is what we want to do. This is how we want to treat the public. We want to take care of them before, during, and after an emergency. We want to actually start keying on prevention. Prevention department sometimes feels like the stepchild is kept out, but prevention is actually what's going to save people's lives if they take care of themselves. We want to reduce fire damage and eliminate fire deaths. Another one that we are very proud of, and y'all may recall that approximately 3-4 months ago we won an award for our cardiac survival rate, and this is one of our performance measures that we can measure. Next one. Fire fatalities, we want to keep them down. Reduce there and eliminate the deaths and injuries. These are things that we can measure and that we use for our performance values. Cheryl? Property loss, again, this is going to come down to prevention and being able to get people to take care of their 2007, you can see that big high-rise, dip there, high-rise, that would be the I Street fire, I believe. And we're doing pretty well there. Again, measurable items that we can do.
Oh, I missed the loss that you mentioned.
2007, you see the high bar, I Street fire, that was the
I got you.
I see, Mark.
Yep, yep.
And if I could add some commentary, the reason that these, from a performance measures viewpoint, is really important because it would be, what would you think if the fire department responded really quick to every fire, but every structure burned to the ground? And so it's important not only how quickly they respond, but also what is the actual loss in structure as well as, loss of life. So that's why these measures help round out their results as opposed to activity.
Our hope is to keep the fire to the room of origin. That's our hope. Okay. Our capital budget, what we hope to ask for this year from the state is a replacement for a ladder truck company. We have two that are fairly old, and two more ambulances that we would like. Our ambulances, we try to do them on a rotating basis. That's it.
Mr. Flynn has a question, and Mr. Holman, a couple more. We'll probably go to 15 minutes after 2, just put that on the table right now, so.
So the replacement, we have a new ambulance at Sand Lake.
It's not in service yet, no, sir. We have ordered the ambulance for that, and we're looking at first quarter budget revision to put that in service.
So it's not in the budget currently?
No, sir, it's not.
And you still need 2 more? You're thinking.
That's just the equipment, yes, sir. We try to do 3 every year because of the use that they get. And that also is area-wide EMS, so we're also replacing Chugiaks and Girdwoods and Anchorages. Those are all in our system, so I talk to my shop guy and he tells me which ones need to be replaced, and that's what we do.
And we're replacing a ladder truck as we shut one down?
We are having actually, truck 11 burned down.
I remember that.
And so we are having a new one built, and it should be, actually, they did the 50% inspection on it just in the last couple of days. My truck companies that I have now, 2 of them are very old, and they need to be replaced. But that might be reduced down to 1.
You're closing one down?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Drummond, we'll just start on your end.
Actually, Mr. Flynn asked the Sand Lake question. So approximately the same time, a year later, that the voters approved the staffing and the funding for the ambulance and put into place this year.
Yes, ma'am.
First year.
Yes, ma'am.
And that includes the staffing.
Yes, ma'am.
Which is the bulk of that cost.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Holman?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the Public Safety Committee, I asked Chief Paul to spot every meeting and keeps me status update on the vehicles, equipment, and apparatus, and medical 7. Chief, does the impact of having these engine and ladder truck not in service, is there a greater impact, for instance, to someone's personal insurance, fire insurance? Is there impact to the community in that regard? I mean, much like not having enough funding for bonds, is it the same kind of a process for the Insurance Institute?
I'm not sure what a personal insurance, the ISO rating, the Insurance Service Organization rating, that could be affected, yes, but I don't know what that is yet.
And that cost would come from what, a homeowner, perhaps, that lived in one of those areas?
I believe it is homeowners, but mostly I think it is in regards to commercial insurance.
Commercial, mostly?
But I'm not 100% positive on that.
On that point, if I could, I've noticed my own homeowner's insurance has been up around $800 a year for decades, literally. And in the last several years, it's gone down to about $550 a year. Same insurer, no difference in coverage or any of that stuff. So I believe that the work that this city has done in providing good fire service has saved us all money. Fire insurance, however, does not put out fires.
No, ma'am.
So I'm going to remember that point.
And just to follow up real quick, and I don't say it often enough, but I do thank you for your efforts at the fire department, the line, very professional. They turn out community councils, they keep up to date, keep us updated, and reminder on CO detectors, smoke detectors, and actually proactive. I mean, in the way of prevention, that it goes a long way, so I appreciate you and your staff. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Flynn asked the question I was going to ask.
Mr. Flynn, did you have a follow-up?
Yes.
Insert you there.
Thank you. You mentioned you're not filling some positions this year in an effort to save some money. Chief, you mentioned using some labor savings from 10 to fund Academy 11. Is that something you're looking at as well?
Actually, we've been working with employee relations to develop a different hiring practice for the Anchorage Fire Department. And what we're looking at trying to do is hire laterals. Basically, we're looking at 3 different types of folks. People that have the experience and credentials to come to work. The people that have just credentials and no experience, like somebody from UAF. And then the person that has no credentials and no experience. The folks that we're going to try to target, we hope to advertise January 1, would be the folks that have experience and credentials that we could give them a test of some type to prove what they have, and then put them on the line and do some OJT. That's one avenue that we're looking at trying to do. Right now, we do not have an academy plan for 11, but that is not, I'm still talking with the administration.
Okay, we've been trying to do that for a while now. Thank you.
Mr. Birch?
I just had a question, looking at some of the upper reaches in the hillside there, and looking at your exhibit there on page 44, where it's got the black line is Anchorage Fire Service Area boundary. Within the last month, I think there's someplace in the lower 48 where they had a subscription fire service. The fire truck comes screeching to a halt right to the end of the property boundary and watch the building burn down. And I guess I was unfamiliar that there were some properties outside of the boundary up on the upper hillside. How do you deal with that?
We respond, when they call, we respond, we fight the fire, we take care of business, we do what needs to be done. And then we have a way of billing outside of the fire service area for firefighting.
Good. And then, secondly, Jennifer and I know we always talk to the chief down in Girdwood, and they have a huge cost associated with providing ambulance service to kind of outside of the Girdwood area for tourists and into Portage and whatnot. Do you find yourself outside of the city district, or on the Seward Highway in particular, with accidents down there? Do you have a mutual aid agreement, or how do you?
We do have a mutual aid agreement with Girdwood. However, the area all the way from Girdwood all the way past up to Kinnick is area-wide EMS.
Right.
So our people respond there. And in regards to vehicle accidents or medical emergencies, we treat them just like anybody else in the area-wide EMS area. We have been talking with the administration in regards to doing, other than EMS service, outside of the fire service area into the EMS service area. Can we charge them with a fire truck? If we send a fire truck to help out like a high angle rescue or a boat out in the inlet and it's out, is that something we can charge for? And that's something I believe that we've already talked with fees and fines, but this is something in the next couple of weeks we'll be talking with Ms. Frask.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Birch asked you about, I think he did, about fire service outside of the service area. And you said, you take care of business, and then you follow up with a bill. So do they pay, or do they say, thank you very much, you saved my life, see you later?
Actually, we've been able to collect. We did have one person say, I didn't call you. My neighbor called. I didn't care if you were here or not. So we're working with that.
One person?
So that's the only one I can recall of that sticks out in my mind that people refuse to pay.
It doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the fires there's no way to recover the cost because it was state land.
Right.
Other places. No, there's not a responsible party.
I understand.
Available.
Thank you. I was just curious. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Birch?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Mr. Hall?
My question's been answered.
Ms. Johnson?
How do you think you're gonna be able to do this year as far as your actuals on your overtime? How do you feel about that?
My overtime is a difficult thing to deal with because it's contract mandated. When I put something in service, I have to have a certain amount of people on it. Whether it's 3 on a fire truck or 2 on an ambulance. Somebody calls in sick, I have to call in overtime. It's a difficult target, and we did our best this year using our non-labor funds to help me offset my labor funds. And as Mr. Mew pointed out, Chief Mew pointed out a few minutes ago, they worked really hard to get that done. We have also. And it is something that I've kept the administration aware of, and it's going to be difficult. My overtime if we keep these apparatus shut down, that's gonna help me tremendously in my overtime.
And then, do you have a rotating schedule as far as maintenance for your vehicles? And have you had to lengthen that, or is it the same as been since?
Actually, we've improved our maintenance schedule. In the past, we used to rely on putting a little marker or label on the speedometer, and, the firefighter, the engineers would recognize, okay, hey, this is due for PM, preventive maintenance. However, now we have computerized it, and my shop personnel, they can follow the piece of apparatus, and work orders get submitted on different pieces of apparatus, and he has done a really good job, actually, of maintaining my shop and doing a good job on maintenance. They're doing the best they can with what they have too. We've had some difficulties there, but they're doing an outstanding job. My guy Harold Jones has really done an outstanding job in the shop.
And I guess my last question is your, and I guess this might be for Lucinda, your payroll, will this all be part of your?
Yes, ma'am.
So you are working with our CFO?
Yes, ma'am. I brought her in, and she met my payroll folks, saw what they did, and she's been working with John Drozdowski, and yes, we are a big part of that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Trainee?
No.
Well, I'll follow up with the payroll specialist things a little bit. It's still in your budget for 2011. Will we gain some efficiencies in how you do that to where they'll affect your budget in 2011? And I've done my homework, and I also put forth an amendment last year for that very thing, and there were some assurances that we were looking at it. Here we are 12 months later, and we're still in the budget.
Well, I will tell you that this is one that they've been working on, and she's taken the time to come over with me for a couple hours to see how we now do it by hand. We have a program in use at the Anchorage Fire Department. For how long Stella staff been here?
5 years.
5 years. That can meld in really quick, and I think with the impetus and the push from finance, I think you're gonna see some changes probably within 6 months.
And Mr. Chairman, we're anticipating any budget savings to be part of our first quarter package.
I would rather assure my residents in Chugach, Eagle River that we're gonna have additional firefighters. And I understand my heated passion, I'm losing 14 out there. So if I gotta trade personnel specialists, then I would, I'm ready to start to have that argument about why it needs to be done this budget cycle and not first quarter adjustment. I have to do that. Which leads me into the alternative vehicles that may be available as opposed to a ladder truck. That's a very big behemoth rig that dispatches out to that, and I understand the concept that it carries some of the tools and it has some of the support stuff that you may need on a fire or response. Is there an alternative, a cheaper way of doing business, if you will, for my area in particular, Station 11? And if it's $1.8 million, I don't know if I can come up with that, but what will 600,000 buy me, or that kind of thing for a number of bodies?
Well, if I can, first of all, the fire truck is a key component of firefighting. Whenever we have a fire, the engine shows up, it's the first rig on scene. They make sure that they leave room for the fire truck, because that's what the firefighters are gonna do work. It's like the toolbox, if you will. Specifically for Station 11, we had 2 sister trucks. The one that burned was what we called a Pierce All-Steer. Truck 12 is the same truck. I made a commitment to the folks out in Eagle River that, hey, we're gonna buy you this truck. I am not gonna switch it with one in town so that you get the old one. However, the personnel at Station 11 came to me and said, we want that truck. We want truck 12 because it has the all-steer, because it can get to areas that some of these big behemoths can't and shouldn't even be trying to go to. So I think that is our plan, correct me when I go wrong, gentlemen, that we are going to put truck 12 out there, and I think you need the truck as it is to do firefighting. Truck 3 will be responding to to Station 11's area to fill that void.
So when you really say in your budget book for reductions, then you're saying an engine, but you really mean an engine company, is what you just said to me there, is the rigs, the ladder truck or the toolbox is going to be dispatched out of that station.
Out of Station 3, not at Station...
Airport Heights.
Airport Heights, yeah, I'm sorry, thanks. Airport Heights, no sir, not at 11. 11 will be gone.
So you're going to dispatch a rig that can't go over 30 mile an hour in chains from Airport Heights to get to my area.
I need to get a vehicle there to help out with those firefighters out there, or I will look at whatever's available.
I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I've seen that thing try to go from Station 11 2 miles up the hill, and it takes 20 minutes. you're gonna chain that thing up and you're gonna drive it from Airport Heights and be equipped to handle a fire in my area in what, an hour? I mean,
Well, I don't know what truck you're talking about, that's only going 30 miles an hour. Granted,
You
when we
put
have-
chains on a rig, chief, you know how fast they get to go.
I understand completely. However, it will all depend on where and when it comes from. I mean, you're absolutely right, that could happen sometimes.
Any question?
Okay, how many times did it happen last year?
Well, if you go
211?
back to that slide, I don't know.
211.
Well, I thought it was 178.
Well, we're trying to, and I know you're trying to do that to me, Mr. Chairman, but
Go ahead.
the point is a solution needs to come out of this because of the areas of coverage. We go all the way out to Connect River Bridge with this dispatch rig. Chugiak is there. So leads to my next question is we have an auxiliary model in our fire department that allows, and I don't know it well enough to do that, but it's the auxiliary model, the auxiliary designated fire group, not a volunteer per se. We have one of those too out in my area, but an auxiliary, a lesser qualified group of folks that perhaps cost the city less. Can they be empowered to pick up the slack here?
The only auxiliaries that I've ever known of would be the folks up in South Fork. And as you know, that's not, we don't have that availability anymore. We do have the station up there, and we have a tender up there, and a couple of brush rigs are there also. So Station 11 will be responding to South Fork area.
Okay.
Did you have more, Jake, for answering?
Mr. Birch, go ahead.
I just had just the question of chains. I know the school buses have those little widgets that stick down and kind of spin the chain underneath. So in other words, they don't have to go 30 miles an hour and then put the chains on. They just push a button and put the chain. I just don't know. Is fire truck the same way?
Our apparatus, our apparatus do have on-spots. They're called on-spots, yes. However, we do chain some vehicles. Our tenders are chained, the water carriers. Trucks? We don't chain trucks, do we?
Not especially.
I was just curious because we have hills,
Do
we
we train
have a lot
trucks?
of steep terrain in the hillside too.
They come out of the
Which ones
station
can chain?
chain
We don't chain
generally, so
12.
if you're going to dispatch one from the
Can't
other
chain
station,
12.
they got to
Can't
drive
do it with
chains or
those
put
two.
them out when they get there.
Yeah, I just
What's
was
that?
curious whether they have the on spot.
The thing you need to consider,
No, the Ulster.
Yeah,
star on the
I got
trucks
that
are, it would not normally be chained. It would respond from Station 3 to Station 11's area with no chains all times of the year. And then you have to consider the time of the year. If it's summertime, there would be no needs for chains at all. And then you'd have to consider if it's wintertime, are they responding to an area where they need chains?
Well,
And in most situations, I would not take a truck company and put chains on it and drive it on one of those steep roads. It would just be a very, very precarious situation. So normally we shuttle the personnel. And you gotta think there's some portion of the Eagle River that's real, and we would refer to as flatland, chains wouldn't be needed, so.
I've just visited the station often enough in winter to know that they oftentimes have it ready to go chained.
As a standard, that station keeps their apparatus chained.
That's right. So if we're changing that, I would just want to be sure we can get up the hill and I don't see the fire truck in the ditch while the house burns down.
You and me both.
That's just not going to cut it. There was a couple more comments and then I just wanted to wrap up kind of where we were at with the whole review process. Anything else? I'll spend a few minutes here just, the idea was that with Patrick's efforts on Monday on the enterprise budgets, that discussion has happened and was pretty thorough. This by design was to have two opportunities to meet directly with the department heads. We had already reserved two more work sessions on the 12th and the 19th for our group to have opportunities to flesh that out. Right now I'm tempted to cancel those as needed. We've got a lot of other stuff on our agendas between now and then. So what I'd like to say is that you guys pick it up directly to the department heads. I still think it's appropriate to have 3 public hearings for the public. And with the charter requirements on when we approve the budget, I still think our final public hearing at the municipality level for the public would be the 23rd, with the idea that we try to make a decision up by the 7th. The Tesh amendment says if we can't decide on the 7th, we just stay at it. However, there's a technical statement in there that the clerk knows is that you have to have a previous public hearing in a certain allotted time. So if Mr. Trainee carries the meeting forward on the 7th, we may have to open that night in some other format and revisit the budget approval later in December. So cognizant to that, which would be a way for us to kind of come together. I see you folks, Mr. Flynn, are you calling the informal meetings or who's actually posting those?
I haven't, I think Mike posted it.
Which is appropriate to do to not violate the open meetings law with the 3 deal. So I think collectively, as we kind of come up with solutions, one part of that, of course, is the amendments. I personally would rather see the public hearing closed before we start to posture the changes to the budget. I want to hear from the public until they're exhausted speaking to us. So you're going to see public testimony on Tuesday, and Mr. Train will facilitate public testimony on the 23rd. If it gets out of hand, that they're just kind of more of the same, we may have to do something else in that regard. But I think the value of public hearings is just that. We had the work sessions that the administration set up, but now it's the public's chance to speak to us as it relates. But budget amendments would be right after Thanksgiving, which would be the Monday on the 29th, November 29th. So what we can try to do then is in some format or another circulate those, again, without violating open meetings law or a circular meeting or serial meeting conversation, to get the budget amendments out there. Ideally, there's nothing prohibiting from an assembly member laying one on the table the night of budget approvals, but it's contentious when you do it that way. So we should have the budget form agreeing to try to put one form per assembly member to address both your capital and your operating budget amendments all in one big go. Whether we can pull that off or not, I don't know. But funding source is real important, so study your budget books to come up with where the money's coming from. If you're going to increase the budget, just say you're raising taxes or you're raising fees or some other statement. Just make sure you've consulted perhaps legal or OMB that you can legally do that. Sometimes you can't because you're messing with grant programs or you're messing with funding sources that, like these fees and fines ordinance, you have to go through a different public process. So you can't just raise the swimming pool fees without an ordinance that does that on the books. So I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at in sort of public disclosure. The administration is doing a very good job forthcoming. The BAC is in the thick of theirs. They've got white papers that are coming our way with the idea that their committee group as a BAC would present to us most likely on the 23rd is what we have set up now. They would take a public information opportunity and tender us their recommendations, again, after public hearing closes. The BAC is out there working. Chief, just because you're at the table, you met with the BAC folks in a representative manner, and that all went good.
Fine.
Okay.
Answered all their questions, I believe. And
yeah, they still have a couple, 3 departments yet to flesh out, and they're wrapping up those white pages. As soon as I have their summary reports, I'll try to get those bound up and sent over to the body for their consideration. Anything else I should be doing as a chair or leader, trying to move the budget discussion so we can get to an agreement? That's our goal here, is to come up with a spending plan that works. I'll tell you, it's a lot of work. So, anything else to add? Because I can close it. Closed. Thank you.